Chapter 1648. A while ago, Dai Mingfan rushed into the sky, and the sight before her left her shocked. The bookshelves, which were usually clean and neatly arranged, had fallen to the ground. Millions of books were piled up into a mountain of books. At the top of the mountain of books, a ray of sunlight descended. Dust drifted through the air within the light. An old man in black clothes was currently reading one of the books with his head lowered. He flipped through it very slowly, page by page. Greetings, Spirit Sovereign. Dai Mingfan wanted to turn down the first senior sister's appointment, but before she could say anything, Spirit Sovereign Guihai said, "This is an order. What if I turn it down?" Dai Mingfan raised her head and glared at Spirit Sovereign Guihai. She did not want to be some nuisance of a first senior sister and fight demon folk to the death. "You want to betray the sect as well?" Spirit Sovereign Guihai raised an eyebrow. Under the gaze of the pair of eyes that were as deep and silent as the deep sea, Dai Mingfan's anger suddenly vanished, as if she had been swallowed by the icy cold seawater. She lowered her head and clasped her hands. "I dare not." She understood very well that if she disobeyed on the spot, she probably would not be able to make it out alive. In the eyes of the small fries of the Green Sun Monastery, she was an unreachable, important figure, but in the myriad sect, true disciples were merely expendable replacements. Compared to the entire cultivation community, they were even more worthless. She dared not openly oppose a powerful human immortal, nor did she even have the courage to flee the myriad sect. Now that the crisis of the world was upon them, the myriad sect was the only thing she could rely on. Even though Yang soul cultivators stood at the apex of all cultivators, they were still just cultivators. If she did not become a human immortal, it would all be for naught. Spirit Sovereign Guihai lowered his eyes and said nothing more. He only waved his hand, and she scurried back to the legacy hall obediently, becoming the first senior sister of the myriad sect. When she heard the two words, first senior sister, the veins on Dai Mingfan's forehead bulged. Her fury suddenly erupted as she stared at Yang Miaozhen viciously. She seemed like she wanted to eat her. In that moment she basically seemed to have become a different person. Just now she was as passionate as the summer, but now she was as cold as the harsh winter. The ferocious aura released from his body instantly filled the entire hall, shocking everyone in the hall. They deeply understood the horror of a Yangshan cultivator at the peak of cultivation. Only Yang Miaozhen remained unmoved, and her indifference revealed a type of resoluteness. Dai Mingfan's heart skipped a beat as if she had seen the shadow of that man. She couldn't help but restrain her momentum, but the atmosphere became more and more solemn. "Junior sister, you have a good temperament. People of our generation shouldn't have too many selfish and distracting thoughts." Yang Miaozhen's misty eyes swept across the people of Qingyang Abbey. No one dared to look her in the eyes, including Jinren Qingyang. Finally, her eyes returned to Dai Mingfan. She smiled and said, "Moreover, that person once taught me that the path of cultivation should be courageous and diligent, not fearing death. Then do you know what the consequences are of being involved with the demon domain in the mortal realm? I've always focused on cultivation and never cared about worldly affairs. Since you're a genius, I'll ask you again. What's your relationship with Li Qingshan?" Yang Miaozhen replied indifferently, "An old friend and also the father of my child." "Then there's no other way." Dai Mingfan spread her hands and decisively ordered, "Take her down." However, apart from the people of the Qingyang Abbey, there were no other disciples of the myriad sect in the hall. She stared at the Jinren Qingyang covetously. The Jinren Qingyang's back was drenched in sweat as if he was sitting on pins and needles. Dai Mingfan squinted her eyes slightly. "You're also acquainted with Li Qingshan?" "Of course not. Of course not, first senior sister." The Jinren Qingyang waved his hand repeatedly. "Li Qingshan has turned his back on humanity and become a demon folk. Everyone has the right to punish him. I'm tempted to devour a damned traitor like him alive, so why would I be involved with him?" He understood very well that in the mortal realm, you could slaughter people, slaughter cities, and refine souls. As long as you did not provoke other cultivators, no one would care about you. However, if they became involved with the demon domain, even if they were forced or tricked, the desireless heavenly palace would definitely be punished. They would either order the various large sects to hunt them down, or they would directly send down the Luding and Liujia divine generals. Not only would they kill them for good, but they would also destroy their souls so that they would never be able to reincarnate again. As for the cultivators who had fallen to the demon domain, they would be referred to as traitors. They were even more despicable than demon folk themselves. Even if they could not punish them personally, everyone related to them would be dragged into it. In less serious cases, their path of cultivation would be severed, while in more serious cases, they would die and be sent into samsara. As a result, even the current first senior sister, Dai Mingfan, had to work hard to draw a clear line between her and Li Qingshan. Dai Mingfan frowned. Then why don't you do it? Aren't you a disciple of the Myriad sect? Yes, master. The Jinren Qingyang accepted the order and made his way towards Yang Miaozhen. Clang, 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 Myriad City fell deathly silent. Everyone had yet to recover from their shock, as if they had been struck by a freezing curse at the same time. The bell in the Hall of Inheritance suddenly rang out, gathering all the true disciples for a meeting. Everyone else was chased away. Immediately, streaks of light shot through the sky and landed in the Hall of Inheritance. With a hum, the freezing curse was lifted. Myriad City immediately burst into an uproar. All the cultivators discussed loudly, their voices soaring into the sky. The first senior brother of the Myriad sect had fallen to the demon domain. This was a huge scandal, and it was also unheard of. Was this the omen of the catastrophe of the world? In the Hall of Inheritance, the formation was activated, and the door was tightly shut. The true disciples sat down according to the order on the Myriad phenomenon ranking. They all frowned and remained silent in thought, as if they were still digesting this shocking news. Dai Mingfan sat upright in her seat of honor. Junior brothers and sisters, is there anything you want to say? Qingshan would never fall to the demon domain. A soft, delicate voice rang out from a corner, but it was filled with unshakable trust. There must be some misunderstanding. Dai Mingfan looked over. She saw a woman in green clothes and long hair like ink sitting there quietly. She seemed rather excited. Junior sister Ruan, are you saying that the spiritual sovereign is wrong? Ruan Yaozhu lowered her head. She pinched the corner of her clothes in silence. Dai Mingfan stood up. Since no one has anything to say, then listen to my orders. Where is Pai Yangqiu? I'm here. Under the order of the spiritual sovereign, the Abundance Department will take back the mysterious underworld cave immediately. You want me to break the formation? Pai Yangqiu frowned heavily. He had some ties with Li Qingshan. In the past, he was the one who had passed the formation disc to Li Qingshan. The cave was a cultivator's lifeblood. It was not only a precious place for daily cultivation, but also a place to store all their belongings. It was necessary to set up a protective formation so they couldn't lose it. How could it be taken back so easily? They had to attack the cave and break the formation. In the mortal world, this kind of action was equivalent to confiscating property. It would create a huge hatred, and they would fight to the death. And all the belongings in the cave. Senior sister, I'm afraid I don't have the ability to do that. Pai Yangqiu didn't want to become enemies with Li Qingshan. He was probably an evil god. You also want to betray the sect? Dai Mingfan sneered, staring at his eyes. Pai Yangqiu was shocked. He couldn't say a word. This terrifying question caused all the elite disciples to open their eyes wide, and the atmosphere instantly became heavy like iron and revealed a trace of the smell of blood. Don't be nervous. This is what the spiritual sovereign said to me just now. Dai Mingfan smiled self-mockingly. You guys should all think about it. Do you want to follow the order or betray the sect? Pai Yangqiu took the order and left. Where is Leng Yuan? I'm here. Under the order of the spiritual sovereign, the penal department will investigate all the disciples who have a close relationship with Li Qingshan. I want them to draw a clear line between them and Li Qingshan. How do we draw a clear line? That's your business. Leng Yuan took the order and left. Where is Ruan Yaozhu? Ruan Yaozhu stood up and walked to the hall. She still looked confused. I'm here. His mount is called Li Fingyuan's Phoenix. He is cultivating in your herb garden, right? Yes. Under the order of the spiritual sovereign, the herb garden will capture Li Fengyuan immediately. Ruan Yaozhu lowered her head and didn't say anything. Dai Mingfan's heart softened. She advised him with a soft voice, Blockhead, your senior sister will give you 3 days. Don't let Li Fengyuan go. Humans and demons are enemies. You have to draw a clear line between them. Otherwise, your senior sister can't help you. Chapter 1649. In the 100 Herb Garden, under the Bodhi tree. A handsome young man was lying on his side. His right hand was supporting his cheek, and his left hand was stretched out in front of him. The thin and soft ochre-yellow silk robe on his body flowed down like water, making him look extremely relaxed and comfortable. His rosy, white face gave off a benevolent and peaceful aura, as if he had fallen into a deep slumber, or perhaps he had sunk into deep thought. He was filled with zen. Suddenly, a gentle breeze brushed past his face. Rustle, rustle. The shadows of the tree swayed and the golden light flickered. The golden leaves on the tree rubbed against one another, producing a faint metallic hum. A gentle voice said, "You must leave here immediately." Only after almost a second later did Li Fengyuan open his eyes, as if he had woken up from an extremely deep dream. He took in Ruan Yaozhu's figure, but his expression was still rather hazy, as if he was shrouded in a layer of mist. "You mustn't." Without waiting for him to answer, a colorful light flew over and gracefully landed on the hill, turning into a white deer. Its antlers were sparkling and translucent like coral, and its fur was shining with 9 colored spots. It was Ruan Yaozhu's mount, the 9-colored deer. Don't meddle," Ruan Yaozhu scolded gently with a wave of her sleeve. The 9-colored deer even took a step forward, blocking Li Fengyuan's path. "Blockhead, you're the one who shouldn't do anything stupid. I've already heard that Li Qingshan has already defected to the demon domain. Your ties with him run far too deep in the first place. If you let this kid go now, you'll never be able to clear your name. Even expelling him from the sect will be considered a light punishment. His life might even be in danger." She turned to Li Fengyuan and said, "Kid, I quite like you, but your father has always been doing whatever he wants. Now that this has happened, even we can't help you." Li Fengyuan nodded with a smile. "My father has always been a great bastard. It's no surprise that he defected to the demon domain." Ruan Yaozhu said, "No, there must be some misunderstanding. He might not be a good person, but he would never associate himself with demon folk. He must have been captured by the demon god. We need to find a way to save him." Her voice gradually trailed off. She understood that she definitely did not have the ability to barge into the demon domain to save someone. But if he ignored it, how could he feel at ease? The 9-colored deer widened its eyes as if it was looking at a fool. "I think you are the one who needs to be saved. Spirit Sovereign Guihai's judgment can't be wrong. How could there be any misunderstanding? The unfettered tome he cultivates is a demonic art. Back then he was flirting with the Swanee demon god outside Black Cloud City. Now he probably thinks that there are too many rules in heaven, so he went to the demon realm to become an evil god." Li Fengyuan laughed and said, "That makes sense. He has always been used to being free." The 9-colored deer nodded approvingly. "I can't tell normally, but you're quite sensible at critical times. Likewise. You are too polite. Shut up, all of you." Ruan Yaozhu's mind was already in a mess. At this moment she couldn't stand them echoing each other. She shouted, "Li Fengyuan, I, as the master of 100 Herb Garden, expel you from 100 Herb Garden. You must leave immediately." "I can't leave." Li Fengyuan shook his head. "If I leave, won't I implicate you? I have my own plans. You are not allowed to leave. Let me go." The 9-colored deer wanted to stop him, but Ruan Yaozhu stepped forward and grabbed her antlers. Tender green vines grew out of her green sleeves and bound her firmly. Li Fengyuan sat up and stretched his arms upwards to stretch his body. "I won't leave." He raised his head again as if he had felt something. He said sternly, "Besides, I can't leave even if I wanted to." The 9-colored deer was still struggling. It looked like it wanted to use its antlers to push Ruan Yaozhu. Ruan Yaozhu's heart shook when she heard this. She immediately closed her eyes and activated the unfettered tome of nature. In an instant, all the plants within a radius of 50 kilometers became her eyes and ears. She immediately sensed that there was a person hiding in the deep sea near 100 Herb Garden. She changed her mind and commanded the seaweed nearby to wrap around that person. That person immediately burst out with a sharp sword qi, turning all the seaweed into powder and extinguishing all their vitality. Senior Marshal Brother Wan. She also immediately recognized this sword qi. Wan Jianfeng cultivated the unfettered tome of sword control. He was the only sword cultivator among the true disciples, and he was extremely good at fighting and killing. If it was one-on-one, there weren't many true disciples who could be his opponent. Ruan Yaozhu glanced at Li Fengyuan in surprise and thought, Senior Marshal Brother Wan's sword Dao is divine. He has already reached the realm of, the brilliance is restrained and the divine objects are concealed. Even I didn't notice it at all, but he could actually notice it. He is indeed a natural god. She couldn't help but frown. If it was only Wan Jianfeng, she could still think of a way to stall him for a while. However, with Senior Marshal Brother Wan's temperament, he definitely wouldn't do such a sneaky thing. He must have been instructed by someone. She couldn't help but look towards the direction of Wanxiang City. Senior Marshal's sister Dai. At the same time, in the direct inheritance hall. The true disciples received their orders and dispersed. In a tall pavilion, Dai Mingfan was also looking towards the direction of 100 Herb Garden. She was ready to help Wan Jianfeng at any time. She had known Ruan Yaozhu for many years and understood her junior martial sister's temperament. She was soft on the outside but hard on the inside. She was tenacious and would most likely let Li Fengyuan escape. Therefore, after Ruan Yaozhu left the direct inheritance hall, she immediately sent Wan Jianfeng to lie in ambush near 100 Herb Garden. Once Li Fengyuan left 100 Herb Garden, he would immediately be captured. Moreover, she had already made up her mind that if she couldn't capture him alive, she would rather kill him than let him go. Although she didn't want to offend Li Qingshan was still far away, and Li Fengyuan was far too important, far more important than Yang Miaozhen. The relationship in the cultivation world was different from that in the secular world. Master and disciple were more important than father and son, the same sect was more important than brothers, and Dao companions were more important than husband and wife. Yang Miaozhen was only Li Qingshan's mistress, so it might not be a big deal to let her go. As long as she was willing to draw a clear line between her and Li Qingshan, she could even stay in Wanxiang sect and continue to be a disciple. However, mounts and masters shared lifespans and shared weal and woe. If one were to talk about a close relationship, it might be even more intimate than a master and disciple Dao companion. They could almost be considered as one. Furthermore, it was a phoenix. The infernal domain was not under the control of the netherworld. If a phoenix were to return to Li Qingshan's side, it would be equivalent to him having an endless lifespan. He might even cultivate to become a fiend celestial one day. Now that the chaos demon star had appeared, the great calamity of heaven and earth was imminent, and the war with the infernal domain was about to break out. It was the most sensitive and tense time. Li Qingshan's betrayal had already put the Wanxiang sect in a very passive position. If such a thing happened again, the selfless heavenly palace would definitely not let the related people off. When that happened, it would not be a matter of one or two people. The entire Wanxiang sect and even spirit sovereign Guihai would be punished. At that moment, a wisp of sword chi that was as thin as a gossamer flew into the pavilion. Wan Jianfeng sent a message back. Eldest senior sister, junior sister Ruan has already sensed it. Do you want me to directly take down that phoenix? Continue guarding. I've given her 3 days. Yes. Although Wan Jianfeng was unwilling, he did not dare to disobey orders under the circumstances. He just released countless sword chi as if to vent his anger, cutting down all the seaweed within a 5-kilometer radius. He leaped onto a protruding reef, slanted his long sword and stood with his hands behind his back. The corners of Dai Mingfan's lips curled up into a smile. She suddenly felt that being the eldest senior sister was not entirely a bad thing. These true disciples were all proud and arrogant, and Wan Jianfeng was even more arrogant. He refused to submit to anyone. In the past he did not respect her, the third senior sister, but now they all bowed their heads and listened to her orders. She could not help but look down at her right hand, fair-skinned, slender fingers, and gently clenched it. This was the taste of power. It was far more delicious than she had imagined. It was better to rely on oneself than on others. Spirit Sovereign Guihai and Li Qingshan were all unreliable. The only one she could rely on was herself. Chapter 1650. Boom. The waves shattered and splashes flew everywhere. Wan Jianfeng burst out of the sea, no longer hiding his aura. Sword chi rushed into the clouds, piercing through the sea and cutting through the clouds. It was like a supreme divine sword was placed across Ruan Yaozhu's slender, fair neck. Even though it did not contain any killing intent, it was still frightening. Junior sister, I don't want to do this either. Don't just care about your personal feelings and ignore the greater good of the sect. You better make up your mind soon. Don't make me waste my time here. Immediately, murderous sword intent filled the 100 Herb Garden, kicking up a chilly gust of wind. It made countless flowers and trees brim with intelligence curl up and shrink. The Bodhi tree rustled. Many disciples were currently working in the garden when they suddenly felt like they were facing a great enemy. They could not help but straighten up and look around, just like a group of rabbits on a grassy plain, searching for the traces of wolves. What powerful sword intent! Li Fengyuan praised. This was the most powerful sword cultivator he had ever seen in his life. There was a major realm of cultivation between them. It was definitely not something he could deal with right now. However, he remained the same as before, completely fearless. Even the 9-colored deer secretly admired his courage. This kid really is that guy's son after all. They're both as bold as each other. Wherever the sword pointed, the wind blew and the grass fell. Ruan Yaoju's black hair drifted about. She closed her eyes and furrowed her brows tightly as she murmured, "Personal feelings and the greater good of the sect." These words were like a bolt of lightning, as if someone had exposed her secret with a single sentence. It made her tremble inside. She could not lie to herself and others and say that there was no personal feelings at all in all of this. She was not afraid of Wang Jianfeng's sword, nor was she afraid of Dai Mingfan's identity, but she had to consider the sect's kindness of nurturing her, the friendship of her senior brothers and sisters, and the greater good of purging demons. If Li Qingshan really joined the demon domain, then wouldn't her current actions only boost the arrogance of demon folk? Not only would it humiliate the countless seniors who had sacrificed themselves on the battlefield of the demon domain, but who knew how many more people would die as well. She was different from Dai Mingfan. She was not so obsessed with life. However, she could ignore her personal interests, but she could not ignore the greater good. She was not afraid of death, but she was afraid of harming others. For a moment, she fell into a great struggle and couldn't help but let go of the nine-colored deer. The nine-colored deer gently poked her with its antlers to show its revenge. It proudly said to Li Fengyuan, "Boy, you can't leave now." "I never planned to leave." Li Fengyuan seriously looked at Ruan Yaoju, waiting for her to make a decision, but he wasn't worried about his own safety. He also had a decision to make, about righteousness, about trust, about sacrifice, and about Li Qingshan. "You can leave now." The nine-colored deer glanced at Ruan Yaoju. He knew that it was impossible for her to take the initiative to capture Li Fengyuan, so he could only ask her to leave. "All right." Li Fengyuan immediately stood up. Without the slightest hesitation, he transformed into a magnificent phoenix, let out a long cry and flapped his wings. However, he did not run away. Instead, he faced Wang Jianfeng determined to fight. At this moment, Ruan Yaoju suddenly opened her eyes. She had already made up her mind. She raised her hand high into the air, and rings of green light shone from her hand, illuminating the sky like a piece of green jade. Countless profound inscriptions and crisscrossing webs could be vaguely seen within, blocking the sword qi in the air outside the garden. The phoenix bounced back mid-air as well. It could not help but look back at her. It was rather shocked inside. It understood that she had already activated the formation and completely sealed off the 100-herb garden. This was basically equivalent to severing ties with the myriad phenomenon sect, confirming her relationship with Li Qingshan. She would have to shoulder a huge responsibility. At the very least, she would be expelled from the sect. "Since I promised him that I would protect you, I definitely won't go back on my word." Ruan Yaoju raised her head at the sky. "And I believe that he definitely won't degenerate into a demon folk." Li Fengyuan suddenly found it rather difficult to bear, as he understood the origins of the red demon star better than anyone. It was not just degenerating into a demon folk. It was basically a demon among demons, the source of disaster and chaos. Her hopes were destined to fail. "Let me go. You won't be able to protect me." The phoenix paced around in the sky and advised gently, "You don't have to worry for me. I'll be fine." The 100-herb garden was not a dwelling. The lord of the 100-herb garden was only the caretaker, not the owner. The core authority over the formation did not lie in Ruan Yaoju's hands. Instead, it was directly controlled by the spirit sovereign of the sea. And so what if she possessed the core authority? Could a single formation stop the attacks of the myriad phenomenon sect? Unless she used all the vegetation in the garden as hostages, so that the myriad phenomenon sect would not dare to destroy the formation without good reason, she would completely destroy the 100-herb garden. However, she would rather die than do something like that, so the outcome would not change at all. Once the myriad phenomenon sect took action, he would still struggle to break free. He would just drag her down with him for nothing. However, Ruan Yaoju said, "Whether I can protect him or not depends on him, but whether I can protect him or not depends on me. As long as I can protect him, I'll protect him. As long as I can protect him, I'll protect him." Although the bamboo was delicate, she would rather break than bend. At this moment, the 9-colored deer leaned over and rubbed its head against her gently. "Jiu-er, don't look at me like that. Do you think I don't understand your personality? I knew it would turn out like this. Sigh, the tribulation of love, tribulation of love." Ruan Yaoju smiled slightly. "Perhaps. Forget it, forget it. If not for him, we would already be dead outside Black Cloud City. Just treat it as a life for a life. However, if you dare to let me go, I'll really be angry. We will never separate." Ruan Yaoju gently stroked the 9-colored deer's head. Li Fengyuan sincerely praised, Although Big Daddy is a big bastard, his taste in women is still very accurate. Yuan Yaozhu remained calm. She flipped her hand and pressed down lightly. Li Fengyuan immediately fell heavily to the ground, falling into a patch of iron thorns. He cried out in pain. Outside the 100-herb garden, Wan Jianfeng retracted his sword intent and transmitted his thoughts to Dai Mingfan. How is it? Sai, we are sisters. Give her 3 more days to consider. However, Dai Mingfan summoned another true disciple and ordered, Junior Marshal Brother Ren, go and find that Xin Yushu. Xin Yushu. Ren Chuyu frowned, full of disdain. Xin Yushu, like Yuan Yaozhu, cultivated the Nature Heavenly Book. Before Li Qingshan came to the Myriad Phenomenon sect, he had always been the chief steward of the 100-herb garden. Later he had a conflict with Li Qingshan. In the duel, his body was destroyed and he was expelled from the 100-herb garden. After Li Qingshan became the senior martial brother, he was completely expelled from the Myriad Phenomenon sect. Dai Mingfan actually wanted to summon such a person back, but for what reason? Thinking of this, he suddenly realized something. He glanced in the direction of the 100-herb garden and frowned even deeper. Is it really necessary? I also don't want to destroy the relationship between fellow disciples. However, if Junior Martial Sister Yuan insists on disobeying orders, how can the 100-herb garden be controlled by a traitor? Traitor? Ren Chuyu was furious and stared at Dai Mingfan. He had always treated Yuan Yaozhu as a younger sister. Moreover, it was obviously Dai Mingfan who was closer to Yuan Yaozhu. How could she fall out with him so ruthlessly? Or do you have a better name? Dai Mingfan also realized that she had spoken indiscreetly, but her face showed displeasure. Or do you also want to disobey orders? This disciple doesn't dare. Chapter 1651. Dai Mingfan shivered inside. By now the sky had darkened. A red sun had already sunk into the ocean, but it still filled the western sky with red. She suddenly felt that the evening sea breeze was slightly colder. She could not help but recall the cold wind outside Black Cloud City, the terrifying demon god, as well as his back facing the demon god, as well as the roaring cries of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Li Qingshan. Strangely enough, she had clearly experienced so many soul-stirring events that day, yet they were all blurry. Only this scene was deeply imprinted in her mind. Or rather, it was exactly because this scene was too profound that everything else seemed blurry. Facing Li Qingshan? Stop joking. Dai Mingfan shook her head. The reason why she was bold enough to carry out Spirit Sovereign Guihai's orders was because she had calculated that it was impossible for Li Qingshan to return to the human realm. Otherwise, the desireless heavenly palace would definitely send the Luding and Liujia divine generals to kill him immediately. They might even send a true immortal. Even if Li Qingshan infiltrated Myriad Phenomenon City, the city still had Spirit Sovereign Guihai watching over it. Coupled with the protective formations of the sect, even evil gods would struggle to escape death. Her only chance of meeting him was probably on the battlefield of the demon domain. According to what she knew, the demon folk were retreating on all fronts, giving up large swathes of territory. Countless monks of the Pure Land sect emerged from seclusion to purify the demonic land and reclaim their lost land. With this retreat and advance, a great battle definitely would not erupt in the near future. She had no choice but to be the first senior sister, anyway, so instead of fearing the wolves ahead and the tigers behind, she was better off letting go and using this identity to obtain the most resources and become a human immortal as soon as possible. That way she would have the power to protect herself when the crisis of the world arrived. Even if she ran into Li Qingshan again, she could protect herself at the very least or even put up a fight. No, forget it. I'd better stay away from him. The image of Li Qingshan facing the demon god appeared in Dai Mingfan's mind again, and she immediately dismissed the idea of fighting him. Human immortals possessed a noble status. Evil gods could not compare to them. How could porcelain go up against a jar? In short, no matter how vicious and evil Li Qingshan was, he was like a caged tiger. He could not even touch a hair on her. Thinking of this, she gradually relaxed. She revealed a proud smile and said disdainfully, "Humph, you like being a demon folk." In the 100-herb garden, when Li Fengyuan returned to the Bodhi tree, Yuan Yaozhu had already left. The red clouds burned away and the sky darkened. There was no sound in the garden. The wind rustled the grass and trees. Before she returned to her cave abode, she expelled all the disciples in the garden so that they would not be implicated by her. He could see that those disciples respected and loved her very much. Many of them knelt down and begged her not to do this. Almost all of them were crying as if they were going to part forever. The others stared at him fiercely, filled with hostility. She was also in tears. However, be it stubbornness or stupidity, she was never a person who would easily change her mind. Li Fengyuan stroked the rough trunk of the Bodhi tree and couldn't help but sigh. She was destined to suffer because of this choice. However, how could she be the only one suffering in this world? The person she trusted and hoped for, how much pain and suffering must he be suffering? All living beings are bitter. The sun set, the stars rose, and the stars shone brightly. Li Fengyuan gazed at the scarlet star in the distant horizon. First, Father, since you've already made your choice, choosing to bear the pain of all living beings, then allow me to lend you a hand. As a result, he shook his kasaya and sat down in a lotus position under the Bodhi tree again. He brought his palms together in a dignified manner. He slowly closed his eyes and saw layers of clouds swirling before him again, flapping his wings furiously. Immediately, the clouds parted to reveal the sun. At the end of the billowing sea of clouds was a series of snowy mountains. The highest peak was shaped like a lotus flower. Where the lotus flower blooms. Li Fengyuan murmured to himself. This was not the first time he had seen something like this, but he would be shocked every time he saw it. The red sun rose from the east, illuminating the sea of clouds and hovering above the lotus flower. It dyed the snowy mountains golden red, like a golden lotus. The lotus flower became more and more beautiful. As the light changed, it seemed to bloom at all times, shining with brilliant light and auspicious colors. It was extremely resplendent and holy. This scene was not unfamiliar to Li Qingshan. This was this spirited mountain that he had pushed down with his own hands. However, at this moment for some reason it was still standing. Li Fengyuan flapped his wings and flew into the sky, leaving a long ravine in the sea of clouds. He came to the top of the spirited mountain. There was a magnificent temple at the peak. It was the famous Tempest Temple on the spirited mountain. Its original name was Nalanda Temple, which meant giving without complaint. Li Fengyuan had always preferred its original name, giving Dharma, delivering all living beings from suffering, never tired of it. Looking down from the clouds, people came and went in the temple. Many monks walked among them. Some were meditating, some were talking about scriptures, and some were practicing magic. Whether it was moving or not, it was a scene of prosperity. There was no sign of depression at all. Li Fengyuan descended from the sky and walked slowly. Occasionally he would stop to listen to a passage of scripture or seriously admire a wall painting. A peaceful smile gradually appeared on his face. However, from close up, the appearance of these monks was different from ordinary monks. They were basically barefooted like ascetics and their clothes were very old. Many even had long hair and beards. Moreover, none of the monks noticed Li Fengyuan's existence. Even if they looked at him, their gazes would pass through him. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, heavy footsteps sounded behind him. A black shadow shrouded him. However, Li Fengyuan did not dodge. A bare-chested Vajra wrapped in a dress passed through him, carrying a huge log that required dozens of people to wrap their arms around. It strode towards the Mahavira hall that was under construction not far away. It was like an illusion or a dream. This was the distant past, the origin of Nalanda Temple. Li Fengyuan had been immersed in it all these years, studying the original scriptures, practicing ancient magic, comprehending the laws of meditation. He had received endless revelations. Most importantly, he had seen Nalanda Temple being built on the ice and snow wasteland with his own eyes. Every brick, every tile, every blade of grass, every tree, every hall, bell tower, pagoda. Everything that had been destroyed by Li Qingshan in the end. Li Fengyuan knew clearly that Spirited Mountain had been pushed down and Nalanda Temple had been destroyed. It would never be rebuilt. Therefore, looking at everything here, he often felt sorrow. It was as if he was looking at a baby, how it was born, how it was crying, how it was curiously looking at the world, how it was running, how it was playing, how it was learning. But he was already dead long before he was destroyed. Reincarnation of all tribulations, success, residence, destruction, and emptiness. The dust and sand of the universe were no exception. So even the immortal phoenix will grow old one day. Chapter 1652. Inside the 100-herb garden, under the Bodhi tree. Li Fengyuan, who was meditating with his eyes closed, suddenly burst into tears. His handsome face revealed a trace of sorrow. The 9-colored deer saw this and felt a trace of pity in his heart. This kid is still young after all. Although he is brave, he is not as unyielding as his old man. However, according to the age of a human, he was probably still a child. How can he not be afraid when a disaster is coming? At the same time, inside the great thunderclap temple in the dream, Li Fengyuan touched his face and looked at the wetness between his fingers in surprise. What is this? Why am I crying? He had experienced this scene countless times in his dream. The destruction of the great thunderclap temple was not news to him. For some reason he was especially touched at this moment. After thinking about it seriously, he understood just now, I am afraid of death. Being greedy for life and afraid of death was the most normal emotion for all living beings in the world. Although the spirit turtle had a long life, there was still an end to it. The divine dragon rode the mist and turned to dust. However, the phoenix was an exception. Not only was it different from normal living beings, but it was also the only exception among the many natural gods. The phoenix could use nirvana to escape from the fate of bad emptiness. It was born with an endless lifespan, so it lacked the concept of death. The analogy of the 9-colored deer was actually wrong. Humans divided their short lifespans into several stages, named infant, child, teenager, and young adult. However, the phoenix could not be divided like this because its lifespan was infinite. It was both an infant and an old man. The endless cycle was nirvana. Moreover, Li Fengyuan was far braver than the 9-colored deer had imagined. The spirit of bravery that he had inherited from Li Qingshan had long since carried through his spirit. Because he had never experienced Li Qingshan's various worries, it was even purer than Li Qingshan himself. The reason why he was crying now was because this was the first time in his life that he felt limited, which was also what people called death. Li Fengyuan lowered his head and stared at the tip of his toes. If he took this step, only death awaited him. No matter if he won or lost, he would definitely die. Even if Li Qingshan were to defeat all the powerful enemies in the end and become known as the Heaven Sovereign, above the 9 heavens, there was no way he could save his life from the 6 paths of reincarnation and the 3,000 worlds. In this great tribulation of heaven and earth, Li Qingshan's victory and defeat had yet to be determined. His life and death had already been determined. Even ants lived in vain, so what about the divine bird phoenix? Li Fengyuan did not know how the other phoenixes would choose, but he was the son of Li Qingshan. Thus he smiled and wiped away his tears. He walked forward calmly as if he was looking at death as if he was returning home. With this step, everything in front of him, be it the palaces, pagodas, pavilions or the monks in the temple, was reduced to ashes. Green, yellow, red, white and black swirled around him. This long dream had finally come to an end. With this step he would become the real king of cooking meat. Even though it was just a joke by Li Qingshan, he had never treated it as a joke. Instead, it was a goal that he had worked hard to achieve. Suddenly, he had a realization and a determination in his heart. This was the first time in his life, and it would also be the last time, that he would shed tears for himself. When the ashes dispersed, the Nalanda temple had already disappeared. There was only a garden in front of him. It was filled with flourishing and lush Bodhi trees with golden leaves. The ground beneath his feet was paved with golden bricks. The sun shone brightly above his head, reflecting and glistening. If Li Qingshan was here, he would definitely find it very familiar. This was the garden that he saw when he first entered the pure land of ultimate bliss. Every blade of grass and every tree was exactly the same. However, compared to everything that he had experienced later on, this garden was really too ordinary and did not leave any impression on him. However, Li Fengyuan had already predicted this and was well versed in Buddhism. He immediately revealed the name of this garden, Only Trees for the Lonely Garden. In the distant era when Mahayana Buddhism was not clear and the great thunderclap temple had yet to be established, this was the main place where Buddha passed down his teachings. It was built by Elder Dugu and Crown Prince Jitoa, hence the name. If the great thunderclap temple was the place where Buddhism flourished, then this was the place where everything started. Li Fengyuan said in a clear voice, "Revered one, I am here. Do you know that you will be burned by the karmic fire and be doomed eternally?" An old and weathered voice sounded and echoed in the lonely garden. "I already know, I have no regrets." Li Fengyuan had come this time for this fire. "Why have you come?" Li Fengyuan answered, "To bear the sins of Li Qingshan." The karmic fire and thunder calamity were both great Taoists that operated between heaven and earth. Even deities could not escape from them. The path that Li Qingshan took would create endless sins and he would be burned by the karmic fire. If there was no one to bear the burden for him, he would definitely not be able to win. What sins did Li Qingshan commit? The voice asked. Li Fengyuan was speechless. He had never felt that Li Qingshan had committed any sins. Go. If you only have the affection of a father and son in your heart, then you are not my disciple. Li Fengyuan seemed to have heard the voice of thunder and suddenly understood, I will bear the sins of all living beings and suffer the pain of all living beings. What is kindness, what is sorrow, who are you to all living beings? Li Fengyuan was unable to answer. The difference between the divine bird phoenix and all living beings was like the difference between the clouds and the mud. Just a moment ago he did not even know what death was. What do all living beings have to do with me? If you see yourself as a god and see all living beings as ants, if you see yourself as a master and see all living beings as slaves, even if you have the virtue of caring for all living beings and a benevolent heart, you are not one of us. All living beings are equal. Li Fengyuan suddenly said, is this the reason why you chose Big Daddy? You gave him the great Daos of the Western Paradise and made him the lord of the demon domain. It was Li Qingshan who chose to be Li Qingshan. It was Li Qingshan who chose to be the lord of the demon domain. Li Fengyuan laughed, yes, who can make a choice for Li Qingshan? Even if it is you, the lord of the world. If you are really as benevolent and omnipotent as people say, how can this boundless world be a sea of bitterness? He said resolutely, if you are benevolent, then you are useless. If you are capable, then you are not benevolent. Although he converted to Buddhism, he still talked and laughed calmly in front of this Lord of Buddhism, the supreme existence among the deities and Buddhas, without any special respect. The voice was silent for a moment and sighed, supernatural power is no match for karma. It seemed to have aged even more. Li Fengyuan asked in reply, what is karma? He came for the fire of karma, but he did not really understand what karma was. There were many different opinions in the Buddhist scriptures and there was no consensus. Karma. There is a cause and there is an effect. There is a cause and there is an effect. So that's how it is. Supernatural power is karma. Li Fengyuan immediately had an epiphany and was suddenly enlightened. 3,000 great Daos and endless spells were all just karma. The path of cultivation, from gathering spiritual energy to the circulation of mana to casting spells, were all just a part of karma. Without the circulation of mana, one couldn't cast spells. Without gathering spiritual energy, one couldn't circulate mana. People were amazed by the great power of supernatural power and spells to move mountains and fill up the sea, but in essence, it was no different from a mortal punching and kicking. It was just that mortals didn't gather spiritual energy, they just ate. Many years ago, the first lesson Li Qingshan learned on the path of cultivation was to eat meat. Therefore, supernatural power is no match for karma, because supernatural power was originally karma. Therefore, even if one was called the Lord of the world, he couldn't bear all karma, so he couldn't be omnipotent. Li Fengyuan already understood the answer to all the questions in this world. I'm not here for Li Qingshan, not for all living beings, I'm here to bear my karma. If there wasn't Li Qingshan, there wouldn't be Li Fengyuan, so Li Qingshan is my cause, so I have to bear his effect. Although phoenixes can transcend life and death, they can't transcend karma. In this situation, phoenixes are no different from mortals, and mortals are no different from ants. All living beings are equal, so I am all living beings. Li Fengyuan felt enlightened, and there were no more doubts in his heart. Even his fear of death disappeared, and he felt that karma had its own reason. The cycle of life and death was originally one thing. Therefore, although the phoenix race had an endless lifespan, there was no phoenix that had survived since the ancient times. Although they were immortal, they couldn't die. The number of phoenixes became fewer and fewer, probably because they had borne their own karma. The voice smiled and said, that's right, come closer. Li Fengyuan felt relieved, knowing that he had passed the test and could continue to seek death, so he walked into the depths of the garden. However, after experiencing the enlightenment just now, his brain was spinning rapidly, his heart was beating fast and he couldn't calm down. He vaguely felt that things weren't so simple. Other than Li Qingshan, there seemed to be a deeper karma with him. But it seemed to be separated by a door and he couldn't break it in a short time. When he went deep into the forest, he finally saw the true face of Buddha, but it was not like the golden statue in the temple with a face like the full moon. Instead, his face was haggard, and his nose was like an eagle's hook. He looked like an ordinary old monk and there was nothing special about him, just like this lonely garden. Moreover, the drooping corners of his mouth and the high hooked nose made his face look very unfriendly. If mortals bumped into him on the road, they might not be willing to give him a bowl of vegetarian rice. But Li Fengyuan felt a strange sense of intimacy, as if they were connected by blood. With a flash of inspiration in his mind, the door suddenly opened, and he instantly understood all the karma. Chapter 1653. The black clouds rolled like ink, the wind howled on the sea and the waves reached the sky. This stormy sea never had a moment of peace, bringing the chill of the north to the human realm. Amidst the raging waves, a tall mountain broke through the surface of the sea, standing on the sea like a giant holding up the clouds with one hand. The mountain was surrounded by steep cliffs and jagged rocks. The wind howled as it blew, as if thousands of fierce beasts were coming back to life. It was originally a dormant volcano, but after generations of owners raised it, it was now unbelievably majestic. Its shape was not like a normal mountain island, and its name had changed countless times. The Xinming Cave, this was its current name. The previous owner was Lin Xian and the current owner was Li Qingshan. They were both senior apprentice brothers of the Myriad sect, or more accurately they were once. At this moment, a ray of light flew over. The ray of light was blue, dazzling, and did not hide its tracks at all. As it neared the mountain, it immediately fell from the sky and hovered low above the sea. It was Pai Yangqiu, the head of the abundance department of the Myriad sect. He was ordered by senior apprentice sister Dai Mingfan to take back the Xinming Cave. Pai Yangqiu raised his head to look at the mountain, his face dark. Since Li Qingshan has fallen into the realm of demons, he shouldn't dare to return to the human realm. This cave has most likely been abandoned. This mission should be more daunting than dangerous. However, as he stared at the Black Mountain, he couldn't help but think of Li Qingshan's figure. Outside Black Cloud City, he led an army and fought against the demon god. Anyone who had experienced that battle would never be able to forget those scenes. At that time, Li Qingshan was the same as him, just a young spirit cultivator. Now he had crossed the boundary between immortal and mortal, and became a human immortal, no, an evil god. How terrifying would he be? Damn Dai Mengfan. Pai Yangqiu cursed in his heart. Although this was his guess, Li Qingshan's actions had always been unexpected. If he really stayed in the cave, then breaking the formation would be equivalent to suicide. However, if he did nothing, he wouldn't end well when he returned to the Myriad sect. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, Pai Yangqiu faced Gao Shan and bowed to the ground, loudly saying, "Eldest senior brother, Pai Yangqiu is here to greet you." His etiquette was respectful and thorough, like a subject greeting the king. Before coming here, Pai Yangqiu already had a plan. If Li Qingshan was really inside, he would pretend that nothing had happened and reminisce about old times. Then he would immediately escape back to Wanxiang City and announce that he had failed the mission. Anyway, no one could ask him to defeat an evil god. However, if Li Qingshan's devilish nature was so deep that he didn't care about their past relationship and wasn't willing to let him off easily, then he could only fall into the devilish domain with him. However, that was basically the worst possible outcome. Unless he had no other choice, he would never mix with demon folk. It was not because of some bullshit like good and evil are irreconcilable, good and evil are right and wrong, but because he never believed demon folk could overturn the heavens. Who would be willing to join an organization that was destined to fail? Unless there was something wrong with his brain. Yes, there was something wrong with Li Qingshan's mind. Although he was strong, there was something wrong with his brain. Pai Yangqiu was sure in his heart. His voice was imbued with power, ringing through the surroundings. For a moment, it actually drowned out the whistling wind. His head hung deeply behind his wide sleeves, but his ears perked up silently. He counted his breaths and listened attentively. However, even when his voice faded away and he had counted 10 breaths, there was only the whistling of the wind in the surroundings. The Xinming dwelling remained deathly silent. Pai Yangqiu rejoiced inside. That kid really is no longer in the human realm. However, he still dared not be careless. He bowed again and said loudly, "First senior brother, I'm here." This bow was no longer as deep as just now. He only bowed slightly. It was not like Li Qingshan was a person who cared that much about etiquette anyway. Even if he really was in there, he probably would not blame him. The Xinming dwelling remained silent like before. Pai Yangqiu heaved a sigh of relief. He was almost completely at ease. He could not help but laugh at himself for being too cautious. However, he straightened his body and shouted, "Li Qingshan, I'm here." This was considered as the last test. Finally confirming that Li Qingshan was not in there, Pai Yangqiu let out a long sigh of relief. He immediately took out a scroll from his sleeve and threw it into the air. The bamboo pieces turned into 24 green lights and scattered in the sky. They turned into 24 light screens that surrounded the Xinming dwelling. They shone with each other and became one. It was as if he had set up another layer of formation outside of the mountain guarding formation. He wanted to use the formation to break the formation. It was not without reason that Dai Mingfan arranged for him to break the formation. Pai Yangqiu, as the head of the Heavens Mansion Department, was most proficient in formations. This scroll was his personal item. It was called the Cave Bamboo Book, and was specially used to break formations. He had relied on this item to break through countless formations and plunder countless caves to reach his current cultivation level. Pai Yangqiu could not be more familiar with the Xianming dwelling's mountain guarding formation. Back then, when Li Qingshan came to break the formation, it was with his help that he was able to succeed. Now that there was no one in the dwelling to control the formation's power was greatly reduced. Furthermore, it was restricted by the cave bamboo book, so its circulation was extremely slow. It had almost completely lost its defensive power. In less than half a day, Pai Yangqiu had successfully broken the formation. Just now, when he was breaking the formation, he was extremely nervous. He was worried that Li Qingshan would rush out to settle the score with him at any time. Now that he had completely relaxed, he revealed a carefree smile. Taking back the mountain guarding formation meant that he had taken back the dwelling. His mission was complete. Just as Pai Yangqiu was about to return to Wanxiang City to report to Dai Ming Fan, he suddenly had an idea. Since there's no one in the cave dwelling, why don't I take a look inside and do my old job of stealing? The dwelling was the foundation of a cultivator. It usually stored all of one's wealth. Li Qingshan himself had a mysterious background. He had inherited all of eldest martial brother Lin Xian's wealth. After the battle at Black Cloud City, he had obtained a huge amount of resources. Pai Yangqiu had done this many times, so he was used to it. However, when he raised his head and looked at the Black Mountain, he felt a chill in his heart. The black giant seemed to be staring at him. However, the greed in his heart burned like a fire. Riches are found in danger. Now that the calamity of the world is imminent, it is time to gather resources and seek to break through the barrier of immortals. Although Li Qingshan is scary, how can I, Pai Yangqiu, be scared by a shadow? He immediately made up his mind. He flew to the peak of the mountain and entered the Xianming cave from the crater. However, if one looked from above, the pitch-black crater looked like a huge abyss that had swallowed a small worm. Once Pai Yangqiu entered the crater, the sound of wind and waves from all directions immediately quieted down. Only the night rain followed him as he fell into the abyss. He couldn't help but slow down and slowly descend. However, in the boundless silence, some voices gradually became prominent. It was as if there were people whispering in his ears. There were men, women, young and old. When mixed together, it was as soft as a mosquito's buzz, full of pain and resentment. He suddenly came to a realization. When he listened carefully, all the voices disappeared and returned to silence. It was as if he was hallucinating. However, when he was slightly distracted, those voices appeared again in the darkness. Together with the chill, they seeped into every pore of his body. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. He wanted to leave the Xianming cave, but the greed in his heart was so strong that he couldn't control it. He could only continue to fall into the abyss, as if he was immersed in a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. Everything was out of control. In a trance, Pai Yangqiu didn't know how long he fell. Suddenly, he clearly heard two voices coming from the bottom of the abyss. "Classmate Xiaoming, your strength recovers quite quickly." A low and light voice broke the silence in the darkness, and all the whispers faded away. "Don't call me Xiaoming. Call me Luo? Ming, what's a classmate anyway?" A voice was slightly hoarse and filled with arrogance. "You don't know. This is the rule where I come from. After Xiaoming, you must add classmate." "Then don't call me Xiaoming, okay? I'm the boss. What I say goes. You're just an Azura battle god, the bird-shooting heavenly king. How can you control me?" Xiaoming was silent for a moment. "I didn't expect you to reach this stage." I didn't expect it either." Pai Yangqiu's eyes widened. The darkness around him faded, and he could vaguely see two men drinking wine on a huge rock at the bottom of the abyss. He was extremely familiar with one of the figures. He recognized it, Li Qingshan. Xiaoming played with the wine cup in his hand. He pondered for a long time and said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. Say it. If the Sky Emperor summons you to surrender, then surrender." Is this what the Azura would say? This is what a friend would say. You think I can't win? No one can, but I believe you can. At least you have a chance. Then why should I surrender? No matter if you win or lose, you'll be burned by the karmic fire. It's useless even if you win. It's useless to me, but it's useful to others. And being burned by the karmic fire isn't necessarily a bad thing. Xiaoming, let's fight. You're the boss. What you say goes. At this moment, Pai Yangqiu recognized Li Qingshan. He was so shocked that he woke up from his nightmare and regained control of his body. Seeing that the two of them didn't seem to notice his existence, he immediately rose up and wanted to leave the Xianming cave. Xiaoming suddenly raised his head. His eyes were darker than the deepest darkness of the abyss. Pai Yangqiu felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. He couldn't even move his little finger. How dare you come in? I'll kill him. Don't. Let him live. If his life lamp is extinguished, that old turtle will be alerted. My son is still in their hands. If he's alerted, then so be it. I'll go save Feng Yuan and kill that old turtle. Who can stop me? No, I'm looking for that old turtle for something else. It's not good for you to reveal your identity now. Go back to the Azura path and continue your campaign. When you've fully recovered, come back and help me. All right, I'm going. Xiaoming nodded. The water of the abyss surged violently. Just now, Pai Yangqiu could see clearly that there was a big black dragon in the abyss. The huge rock that the two of them were on was the dragon's head. At this moment, its aura was revealed. It was clearly a demon immortal. Could it be Big Senior Brother's golden eye dragon? Pai Yangqiu was utterly shocked. Of these three, one was the Azura battle god, one was a demon immortal of the dragon race, and the last one was the unfathomable Li Qingshan. Just what kind of place have I ended up in? Chapter 1654. The mysterious underworld cave. The waves created by the black dragon quickly calmed down, as if an invisible force had smoothed the surface of the water. All sounds quieted down, and there were no more ripples on the surface of the water. It was as smooth as a black mirror. The bottom of the abyss was connected to the sea, and was many times larger than the entrance of the cave. A ray of light shone down from above, but it could only illuminate a small part of the water, like a spotlight in the middle of a stage. Li Qingshan stood under the light, above the black water, and smiled at Pai Yangqiu. Pai Yangqiu clearly saw his own reflection in the black mirror, and his face twisted in fear. He instinctively wanted to run as far as possible, even if it meant betraying the sect. However, anyone with a bit of common sense would know that when facing a beast, running away would only arouse the beast's hunting instinct. He tried to calm himself down, and forced himself to look into Li Qingshan's eyes. He slowly landed on the black water and opened his mouth. This? Pai Yangqiu, who had always been quick and articulate, couldn't speak properly. He was extremely afraid. This kind of fear was completely out of his expectations. The scene of encountering Li Qingshan in his imagination was completely different from facing Li Qingshan in reality. It was as if a person who had only seen a tiger in a painting had suddenly encountered a real tiger in the forest one day. The trembling whiskers, yellowed fangs, orange-red eyes, and a bloody aura. Everything was too real. It assaulted one's senses, causing one to hold their breath and be unable to move. Pai Yangqiu dared to land on the water and stare at the fierce tiger. He had already used up all his courage. If he could have predicted this feeling, he wouldn't have come here even if he was beaten to death. Don't rush, speak slowly. Li Qingshan finally saw what it meant to be dumbstruck, and felt a little strange. Am I that scary? He admitted that he didn't release any killing intent, and he didn't even have any hostility. He just wanted to understand the situation in the Wanxiang sect and recruit Pai Yangqiu to his side. He didn't have any intention of killing him. However, Pai Yangqiu didn't know that in Pai Yangqiu's eyes, his pitch-black eyes were as deep and unfathomable as the black water under his feet. Under the calm water, it was as if there were millions of black dragons roaring and roaring, thirsting for slaughter and destruction. As long as he said one wrong word, he would be devoured and never be able to reincarnate. After Li Qingshan had gone through 7 heavenly tribulations, he had completely stepped into the realm of immortals and Buddhas. There was already a fundamental difference between him and a young spirit cultivator like Pai Yangqiu. As the lord of the infernal domain, he bore the weight of the rage and hatred of the people of the infernal domain for billions of years. They thirsted for slaughter, destruction, and vengeance. They thirsted for vengeance against the immeasurable number of living beings, the immortals and Buddhas of heaven. This power that came with a price constantly washed over his mind. Even when he suppressed it with the spirit turtle transformation, it would still reveal some traces. Therefore, it could be said that Li Qingshan was not hostile towards Pai Yangqiu, but towards all living beings. However, compared to the influence of the living, the thoughts of the dead were violent and turbulent, but they were simple and crude. They were instead easier to control, so they did not affect him from the very core. As a result, as time went by, even he became accustomed to it, completely unaware of it. One was dripping water while the other was a surging flood. The former was insignificant, but its influence was subtle and irresistible. The latter was tremendous, but it only needed proper guidance and a suitable time to pour it out, and it would be pacified. As the saying went, divine might is like a prison. Under such pressure, how could Pai Yangqiu not be afraid? Moreover, he believed he had already deeply offended Li Qingshan by attacking the Xianming dwelling. It made sense for Li Qingshan to want to kill him. This was called having a guilty conscience. He was utterly flustered and afraid. However, to the current Li Qingshan, what was a dwelling? He had to give up everything in the mortal realm in the first place. Now that he had the entire demon domain as his dwelling, just the demonic soil he gave up every day was worth more than 10,000 Xianming dwellings. When he rose up in the future, he would conquer the 6 realms of Sasra and burn the flames of war to the 9 heavens. How could he just take back a dwelling? Before he knew it, a great gust of wind blew, and the Kuan Ping transformation soared into the sky. He carried the sky on his back, and now he was going to Tunan. Yen Ke, who had once been his companion, already struggled to understand his current thoughts. From the perspective of cultivators, the loss of a dwelling was a matter of life and death. It was worth fighting a great battle and deciding life and death. However, from the perspective of gods, it was nothing more than a struggle. The loss or gain was meaningless. Pai Yangqiu saw Li Qingshan approach him and thought he wanted to kill him. He no longer dared to look into his eyes. Suddenly, he leaned forward and bowed to the ground. "Spare me, first senior brother. It's all because Dai Mingfan forced me here." Dai Mingfan. Li Qingshan heard another familiar name. He had a good impression of this third senior sister. Or rather, as long as she was good-looking and did not oppose him, he had a good impression of her. He couldn't help but scold with a smile. "You're a thief, yet you still want to frame others. How can Dai Mingfan control you?" "I'm innocent." Pai Yangqiu let out a blood-curdling screech, and spilled out everything that had happened in the Wanxiang sect, especially Dai Mingfan's perverse actions. He didn't let go of even a single detail. He hated Dai Mingfan to death for making him carry out such a suicidal mission. In the beginning, Li Qingshan found it interesting. He knew Dai Mingfan cherished her life very much and hated war. The spirit sovereign of the seas had probably forcefully pushed this first senior sister onto her head. Her expression back then should have been very interesting. However, when Pai Yangqiu talked about what Ruan Yaozhu said in the inheritance hall, Qingshan would never fall into the demon domain. There must be some misunderstanding. He couldn't help but sigh. Yaozhu, oh Yaozhu. He had to betray her trust again. Then he heard that Dai Mingfan ordered Ruan Yaozhu to capture Li Fengyuan. His face sank and he smiled, showing his teeth. Does this woman really think I can't do anything to her? Pai Yangqiu saw that he had successfully diverted the hatred and was greatly relieved. She thought that after first senior brother entered the demon domain, it would be impossible for him to return. She didn't know that Li Qingshan's power was beyond her imagination. "First senior brother, I'll bring you to the 100 Herb Garden now." Li Qingshan turned his gaze to him. "You also thought that I wouldn't be able to return, right?" "This?" Pai Yangqiu was speechless. He raised his head slightly and secretly glanced at Li Qingshan. He rolled his eyes and regained his usual intelligence. He gradually recovered from the initial fear and thought to himself, the selfless heavenly palace has set up an inescapable net in the human realm. Once the evil god enters the human realm, he will be discovered immediately. How did he escape the selfless heavenly palace's surveillance? He had been silently sensing Li Qingshan's aura and was increasingly sure of his thoughts. The person before me is not the deity Li Qingshan. The reality was as such. Li Qingshan's deity naturally couldn't leave the demon domain. Otherwise, the one who came looking for him would not be Divine General Lu Ding and Liu Jia, but Great Emperor Jianghu himself. Now, there was indeed only one incarnation here. In fact, it was only one of many incarnations. The other incarnations were scattered all over the human realm to recruit soldiers and buy horses, preparing to bring all the evil cultivators into the demon domain. With a great battle at hand, he naturally wouldn't sit idly and wait for others to attack. He had to work hard to strengthen himself and weaken the enemy. In order to avoid being discovered by the selfless heavenly palace, the cultivation of these incarnations wasn't considered high. The one before him was considered relatively strong, but he only had the cultivation of 3 heavenly tribulations. He was stronger than all Yuanine cultivators and could match Yin spirit cultivators, but not Yang spirit cultivators. The gods were not omniscient and omnipotent. Although the sea was vast and boundless, there was also a limit. No matter how strong the power, once it was dispersed, it would only be a trickle. Pai Yangqiu was only frightened by Li Qingshan's shadow, and now he seemed to gradually realize this. Li Qingshan was about to ask him, "Are you willing to follow me?" Pai Yangqiu suddenly jumped up from his kneeling position and rushed into the sky, flying away without a care for anything else. Chapter 1655. A beam of blue light rushed out of the Shenming cave and flew at a right angle to the Wanxiang sect. The waves were huge and the wind was howling. Pai Yangqiu was extremely nervous. He looked back at the Shenming cave, which was like an abyss. Fortunately, the cave was silent. Li Qingshan didn't seem to have any intention of chasing him. He couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. I won the bet. He had determined that it was only a clone, and the clone's cultivation was one heavenly tribulation weaker than the main body at the very least. In other words, the Li Qingshan in the dwelling was only a yang soul cultivator at most. However, the pressure that Li Qingshan gave him was far too great. It was basically like the dark clouds above his head that blanketed the world. He struggled to completely trust his own judgment. If he was wrong, only death awaited him. He was even prepared to abandon his body and escape with only his yang spirit. Even if he had to rebuild his body, it was better than falling into the demon's domain and becoming the demon emperor. Now that he had escaped, the endless sea wind blew in his face. He suddenly felt that the sky was high and the sea was wide. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. I was almost scared by an incarnation. But what did he go through? How did he become so terrifying? Does an evil god have such a strong power? But on second thought, it was Li Qingshan after all. Even if he became an evil god, he wasn't an ordinary evil god. He didn't have time to think about it. His mind was still like the sea. The most important thing now was to return to the Wanxiang sect and report what he had seen and heard in the Shenming cave. The Azura battle god seemed to have a strong background. He could actually make him unable to move with just a look. And what he said was even more shocking. Hellfire burns, the celestial emperor summons? He was shocked and uncertain. What right does an evil god have to be summoned by the celestial emperor? The celestial emperor was the supreme existence in all the worlds. He was almost equivalent to the incarnation of heaven, the so-called god of mortals. Even Buddha had to respectfully call him Your Majesty. And the supreme sect leader of the Wanxiang sect was just a minister who was in charge of the study. For a young spirit cultivator like Pai Yangqiu, his lifelong goal was to ascend to the ninth heaven and be qualified to call him Your Majesty. Yet, such an existence was mentioned by the two of them in an extremely natural manner. In fact, they even faintly seemed to want to contend against it. No matter how smart Pai Yangqiu was, he couldn't figure out what was going on. There seemed to be an answer in his heart, but it seemed to be separated by a layer of membrane, making him feel uneasy and in disbelief. Soon, the myriad elephant sect appeared on the surface of the sea. Pai Yangqiu increased his speed and rushed into the myriad elephant sect's protective array in one breath. Only then did he relax slightly. He was well versed in the art of arrays, and no one understood the power of the all-encompassing array better than he did. Compared to the Black Cloud Roaring Thunder array in Black Cloud City, it was many times more powerful. Furthermore, it was personally presided over by Spirit Lord Guihai, a Khanate god who had survived 6 heavenly tribulations. Even if Li Qingshan's true body dared to barge into the array, he would definitely die, let alone a mere incarnation. Furthermore, there were countless disciples in the sect. With the right timing, location, and people, even 10 evil gods could forget about cracking the array. With an incomparable sense of security, Pai Yangqiu flew into the sky and prepared to report to Spirit Lord Guihai. However, even true disciples did not dare to fly in the sky. All they could do was climb the floors one by one. However, the strange thing was that his mind was unable to completely calm down. Step by step, he reached the top of the tall building. The neatly arranged bookshelves stretched as far as the eye could see. The air was filled with the fragrance of books. Pai Yangqiu found Spirit Lord Guihai behind a particular bookshelf. His back was facing him as he buried his head in a book. Pai Yangqiu bowed his head and cupped his hands. Spirit Lord, Divine Abodes Department Head Pai Yangqiu, has something to report. Is it about Li Qingshan? Spirit Lord Guihai slowly turned his head. That's right. Pai Yangqiu answered, but he suddenly found the voice very familiar. He looked up and saw Li Qingshan's faint smile. He was so shocked that he took a few steps back and pointed at Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan, why are you here? Where else can I go? Li Qingshan slowly turned around. As he turned around, the scenery in the sky changed drastically. Darkness spread out from all directions, drowning the bookshelves like black water. A beam of light penetrated the roof and descended from above, illuminating the area. It was like a stage being illuminated by a spotlight. Li Qingshan was standing in the middle of the stage with Pai Yangqiu. Pai Yangqiu's consciousness blurred for a moment before he realized that he was still standing in the dark underworld cave abode. The mirror-like water surface instantly felt like he had fallen into an ice cavern. Li Qingshan shook his head slightly. Pai Yangqiu was weaker than he imagined. It was not strength but a will. Although the embodiment was only an embodiment, it was still the will of the Lord of the Fiend Domain. In terms of strength, the embodiment was far inferior to Pai Yangqiu. But in terms of will, Pai Yangqiu did not have any form of resistance. From the greed in the beginning, to the fear when he ran into Li Qingshan, and then to the ecstasy from escaping, how could he not be taken advantage of by his inner demons when he was so unsettled and overjoyed? Moreover, from the beginning to the end he never had the slightest thought of fighting. He was either afraid or thinking of escaping. How could he resist Li Qingshan, who carried the will of all living beings in the Fiend Domain? If power was the country, then the will was the king, and the inner demon was the assassin who assassinated the king. When the plan was revealed, the dagger would be revealed. Pai Yangqiu was obviously the ruler of a dead country. He was easily subdued. It was so easy that it was even a little boring. If Li Qingshan did not need Pai Yangqiu's help to break the formation, he would not have bothered with him. However, the sea does not reject small streams. A young spirit cultivator who is proficient in the way of formations is also useful. Li Qingshan walked forward. Pai Yangqiu, I am here in the name of the master of the Fiend Domain to receive you. He did not care whether Pai Yangqiu was willing or not. He pressed his hand on Pai Yangqiu's forehead. Pai Yangqiu had expected the embodiment's strength to be limited and wanted to struggle a little more. Hearing this, his whole body shook. Master of the Fiend Domain. A thought broke through the barrier. Li Qingshan is not an evil god, Li Qingshan is not an evil god, Li Qingshan is not an evil god. You are that Fiend Star? Everything suddenly became clear. He still could not believe it, but it was natural. If he was not a true god, how could he be so majestic? If not for the Fiend Star, how could he be recruited by the Celestial Emperor? Li Qingshan's darkness became incomparably deep, like two black bottomless abysses. Pai Yangqiu could not help but look into them. He felt his whole mind being sucked in. In the abyss he heard the whispers again. There were men and women, young and old, mixed together. It was still as soft as a mosquito's buzz, but it was no longer painful or resentful. Instead, it was filled with fanatical worship. Li Qingshan unified the 12 demon realms and removed the supreme god of the 12 demon gods, making them his assistant gods. He gathered the faith and wishes of all the people in the Fiend Domain on him. These voices were the worship of the people in the Fiend Domain towards the supreme god. At first it was as soft as a mosquito's buzz, but in the blink of an eye, it turned into a loud chant. In the next moment, the sea and sky were howling, shaking like thunder. Pai Yangqiu did not dare to resist. If he resisted, he would only go crazy. In this world, how many people dared to resist the will of a god, and how many people were willing to swear to protect their own conscience? In an instant, the sound waves drowned Pai Yangqiu and became a part of his mind. When he looked at Li Qingshan again, his heart was filled with endless worship. He was willing to die for him. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed, shouting, "My king, you are the master of the Fiend Domain, you are the only true god." Chapter 1656. The myriad phenomenon sect 2 days had already passed since Spirit Venerable Guihai announced Li Qingshan as a traitor. It was like a boulder had been thrown into the water, kicking up a series of shocking waves. However, it still calmed down in the end. Legends were just legends. Life had to continue. The people of the world would always care about themselves the most. Even a trivial matter was more important than the life and death of someone else. Myriad Phenomenon City recovered its former prosperity. Those who wanted to gamble gambled, those who wanted to drink drank, those who wanted to cultivate cultivated, and those who wanted to curry favor with others. Gradually, Li Qingshan's name was no longer taboo. Instead, it became a topic of conversation on the streets. In a small restaurant located in a remote location. Tell me, why did Li Qingshan betray the Demon Domain and flee to the Demon Domain instead of being the first senior brother of the Myriad Phenomenon sect? You don't know about that. Li Qingshan was originally a spy sent by the Demon Domain. He concealed his true cultivation and came to the Myriad Phenomenon sect to steal the secrets of the Heavenly Tome of All. Now that he's become the first senior brother and obtained many scrolls, he obviously fled back to the Demon Domain. How's that possible? No way. What a joke. If Li Qingshan hid his cultivation, how could he fool the spirit venerable Guihai? The people in the surroundings were either astounded, doubtful, or retorted. However, in a corner of the restaurant, there were a few stern-faced men who silently clenched their wine bowls in their hands. One of them, a man with a square face, wide ears, and a dark face, immediately darkened slightly when he heard that. He was about to stand up. The man to his right immediately grabbed his wrist. His body swayed and his bottom fell back down. He snorted through his nostrils and gulped down bowl after bowl of wine. If Li Qingshan hadn't hidden his true cultivation, how could he have gone from a nascent soul cultivator to a young soul cultivator in such a short amount of time? The man smiled faintly as if saying, "You guys are really short-sighted." Although he was only a foundation establishment cultivator, and was still a distance away from the second heavenly tribulation, his tone and expression were filled with confidence, as if everything in the world was under his control. And those demon folk just had to launch a large-scale attack as soon as Li Qingshan arrived. As far as I know, half of the true disciples died outside Black Cloud City. Moreover, that Li Qingshan is extremely despicable and vicious. As soon as he entered the city, he destroyed the teleportation array in the city, causing almost everyone to die in the city. As soon as he said this, everyone was 80% convinced in their hearts. This was the only explanation that could explain the change in Li Qingshan's cultivation base. Many people had already begun to curse Li Qingshan as a traitor, and would die a horrible death sooner or later. Even the voice of the person who had refuted him at the beginning was much weaker now. He muttered in a low voice, "How come I heard that it was Li Qingshan who forced Bai An's incarnation to retreat and defended Black Cloud City? Do you believe it? A young spirit cultivator who has just undergone 5 heavenly tribulations forced a fiend god to retreat?" He smiled scornfully. Don't forget, it was exactly because of this battle that Li Qingshan secured his position as the first senior brother. His reasoning was so reasonable that even if Li Qingshan was present, it would probably be difficult for him to refute it. Everyone had already clearly outlined Li Qingshan's movements in their heads. They were completely convinced that Li Qingshan was a spy sent by the demon domain. A series of furious curses rang out in the restaurant. All of them were flushed with anger as they ground their teeth. They were basically tempted to cut that damn traitor into pieces and skin him alive. Bullshit. Suddenly there was an explosive bellow. The square-faced, broad-eared, and dark-faced man in the corner of the restaurant crushed his wine bowl with a crack and lunged towards the chi practitioner who had spouted nonsense. The people who sat with him stood up in a hurry, but they were already too late to stop him. Moreover, all of them were furious. They did not want to stop him either. Perhaps they were not particularly knowledgeable. Apart from farming in their hometowns, they had spent their entire lives guarding cities on the borders. However, they had all personally experienced the Battle of Black Cloud City. They knew very well that Li Qingshan had not destroyed the teleportation hall to trap everyone in the city. Instead, he had done it to force the true disciples who stood high above to die with them. They had also personally witnessed how Li Qingshan had led the charge and fought bravely, killing wave after wave of demon folk. In the end, he had fought a decisive battle against the demon god's avatar, shattering his body and only stopping when he was dead. Not only had they seen and heard all of this, but they had also clearly felt it. That was because in that moment, they had fought alongside Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan had not defeated the demon folk army alone and defended Black Cloud City. Instead, he had relied on their strength. This was what Li Qingshan had told them personally after the battle, as they were unwilling to accept Li Qingshan's additional reward. Yesterday they had been summoned back from the army and heard countless people curse Li Qingshan, calling him a traitor, a spy, and a traitor. They had endured it all. After all, they were only disciples of the lowest level. They could not even be regarded as disciples. They were only attendants. They had no idea what had happened, much less become the leader of the myriad sect. However, when they heard someone distort the truth, they could not endure it anymore. That was because that battle was their greatest pride. The Foundation establishment cultivator who had been speaking proudly felt proud of his cleverness when a violent killing intent assaulted him from behind. His body stiffened and his hair stood on end. Before he could respond, a great force pressed against his head, pushing down violently. With a bang, his head smashed into the table. The cups and plates flew everywhere, and with a thud, he struck the floor heavily, sinking into a large part of it. The dark-skinned man refused to let go. His fingers seemed like he wanted to crush his head forcefully. His eyes shone with red light, and his face was vicious and vicious, scaring everyone in the surroundings into retreating in fear. During the Battle of Black Cloud City, he had died 3 times and been reborn 3 times. His battle spirit had never been extinguished. He had already obtained the blood of Azura, and he had received 3 rewards from the Desireless Heavenly Palace, the Myriad Sect and Li Qingshan. He had already undergone the first heavenly tribulation and reached Foundation Establishment. As for the person he was pressing down on, although he was also a Foundation Establishment cultivator, other than the competition between fellow disciples, he had never experienced a real fight. Under the pressure of the strong murderous aura, the little bit of ability he had in a fight of magical powers was completely thrown away in Java, and he could only struggle instinctively. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" His voice became shrill and twisted from fear, like a pig waiting to be slaughtered. He no longer possessed the bearing he had just now. "Fuck you." The dark-skinned man waved his fists and hammered randomly, but he did not use much strength. He was only venting the anger in his heart. The restaurant was filled with cries of alarm. Someone shouted, "Stop! Stop fighting! How dare you! Violence is forbidden in Wanxiang City." Someone shouted, "Go get the inspector." The other companions unknowingly stepped forward and silently formed a circle. At this moment, a black-clothed man holding an axe barged into the restaurant and shouted, "Stop! The inspector is here." The inspector was a subordinate of the Department of Law's inspection office and was responsible for maintaining order in the city. They were all dressed in black and held axes. They were not there to fight but to stand out. After all, in Wanxiang City, no one really dared to use violence to resist the law. The few men looked at each other and thought, they came so quickly. Only then did they step forward and pull the dark-skinned man back. The Foundation Establishment cultivator, whose face was covered in bruises, threw himself in front of the inspector as if he had seen his own father. "Sir, they want to kill me. It's all because of that damn traitor Li Qingshan." "That's right, quickly capture them. They're all spies from the Devil Domain." The inspector ignored him and only looked at the few men and reported their names. "Tong Dagong Jiangxing Liexan. Senior Brother Leng requests your presence." The few men's hearts sank. Senior Brother Leng was one of the true disciples, the department head of the Department of Law, Leng Yuan. They were summoned from the Department of Law. The dark-skinned man called Tong Dagong's eyes were still red. He hardened his face and said stiffly, "What do you want us to do?" Chapter 1657. Under the guidance of the inspector, Tong Dagong's group passed through the streets and alleys. Strangely, they were not heading in the direction of the Law Bureau, but outside the city. "Where are we going?" Tong Dagong asked. "You'll know when we get there," the inspector replied. It was dusk and the lanterns were lit. Tong Dagong looked up and saw a hazy sky between the buildings. A light drizzle had begun to fall at some point. They met another group of people on the way who were also heading out of the city under the guidance of the inspector. Although they were not particularly close, they were comrades. After greeting each other, they began to chat and laugh. When something appeared in the sky, everyone raised their heads to look. It was a gigantic figure with its back facing Wanxiang City, standing under the clouds. It was the statue of Li Qingshan. They were all very familiar with that figure. They could not help but recall the black tortoise military god and felt inexplicably excited. As the statue gradually grew larger, they all understood that it was their destination. They vaguely guessed something and their mood gradually became heavy. They all fell silent and walked in the rain as if they were angry at each other. "Draw a clear line between us and Li Qingshan. How could the statue of a traitor be erected so openly outside Wanxiang City?" It was obvious what the Wanxiang sect wanted them to do. As the sky grew darker, more and more lanterns appeared, and the rain grew heavier. There was a quiet commotion in the city as people followed the inspector's footsteps out of the city. The long bridge outside the city gates was already filled with people, waiting to watch the show. The group had to part the crowd to pass through, and the faces around them were cold and excited. On the square at the pier outside the city, the head of the Law Bureau, Leng Yuan, stood with his hands behind his back on a huge beast. It looked like a wolfhound, but it did not have any fur. Instead, it was covered in layers of icicles, emitting an eerie chill. The drizzle turned into snow as soon as it approached. The huge beast lay on the ground, and in front of its claws were the inspectors, law enforcers, judge, and executioners. Li Qingshan's statue stood motionlessly in the sea, gazing into the depths of the sea. It allowed the wind and waves to batter it, completely unaware of what was happening behind it. Reporting to senior brother, Tong Dagong and the others have arrived. Everyone is here. The inspector bowed to Leng Yuan, but Leng Yuan ignored him, so he returned to the ranks of the inspectors. More than 100 soldiers stood on the shore, looking up at the statue of Li Qingshan. From close up, this grayish-black statue looked especially tall and mighty. They had once followed this figure without caring about anything else. And now, behind them were all members of the law sector, and behind them were tens of thousands of spectators. They were all people who had been judged by the legal department to be related to Li Qingshan. Even though there were countless officers and soldiers in the army who worshipped Li Qingshan, there was no way the law sector could investigate all of them. These soldiers had all been heavily rewarded by Li Qingshan after the Battle of Black Cloud City. It could be said that they had received a personal favor from Li Qingshan. In addition, they were all Foundation establishment cultivators who had undergone at least one heavenly tribulation, which was the lowest standard to enter the sect. They could be considered disciples of the Myriad Phenomenon sect, even though they were only attendants or study companions, the lowest positions that didn't even have the status of a disciple. Official disciples who had entered the hall and entered the inner chamber were already the backbone of the sect. They held important positions like commandant and general in the army. If they were to be investigated, they would be investigated in private. They wouldn't be summoned like this in order to draw a clear line between them and Li Qingshan in public. As for those ordinary soldiers with even lower cultivation, no matter how much they worshipped Li Qingshan, it wouldn't be enough to affect the overall situation. It wasn't difficult to change the image of Li Qingshan in their hearts. Even those who refused to repent would be forced to move forward under the circumstances, even if the enemy was Li Qingshan. In fact, the reason why Li Qingshan rewarded them was not because he wanted to do them a favor, but because they fought bravely and didn't hesitate to die. Many of them had died more than 3 times in battle, and after they were resurrected, they still followed in his footsteps. Without them, Li Qingshan couldn't have won that battle. Let's begin. Leng Yuan gave the order. A person immediately stepped forward from the disciplinary organization and called out, "You already know about that traitor Li Qingshan, so there's no need for me to say anything more. As for you, every single one of you is suspected of colluding with the demon domain." Wang Juanxing's chest was filled with the joy of revenge. If there was anyone in the Myriad Phenomenon sect who was the happiest about Li Qingshan's betrayal, it would be him, although Li Qingshan might have already forgotten who he was. He was originally the official in charge of allocating residences in the Department of Abundance. He was bribed by the Herb Garden's chief steward, Xinyu Shu, and made things difficult for Li Qingshan. In the end, he was taught a lesson by Li Qingshan and then expelled from the Department of Abundance by Pai Yangqiu. He lost his lucrative position in the Department of Abundance and had no choice but to become an inspector in the Department of Law. He was also waiting for an opportunity to take revenge on Li Qingshan. However, when Li Qingshan became eldest Xixiang, he no longer dared to stay in Wanxiang City. He hurriedly became a law enforcement department official and went everywhere to arrest criminals. He was still in a constant state of anxiety, afraid that one day, Li Qingshan would remember him and end up like Xinyu Shu. No one knew what kind of days he had been living these past few years. Now that he had been looking forward to it, the day Li Qingshan betrayed him had finally arrived. He felt as if he had been pardoned and was about to go crazy with joy. Other people still cared about Li Qingshan's grace and power and were unwilling to take on such an errand. However, he took the initiative to volunteer not for anything else, but to vent the resentment in his chest. Hearing this, the soldiers were in an uproar. The crime of colluding with the demon territory was even more serious than desertion in the face of battle. There was only death. However, my Department of Law has always been fair and strict. Senior Brother Leng is even more wise and powerful. He won't let a bad person go, nor will he wrongly accuse a good person. Today your mission is to completely destroy this broken statue and not leave a single trace. Also, everyone must take action. If anyone doesn't, think about your own fate. The soldiers looked at each other in dismay, but no one was willing to take action. Wang Juanxing flew into a rage and questioned, "Could it be that you sympathize with that traitor and are also preparing to betray the demon territory?" He couldn't wait for these people to not take action and let the Department of Law kill all of Li Qingshan's lackeys. The soldiers' faces all sank and they didn't move. They were all proud soldiers and valiant generals who had experienced hundreds of battles. The more they were threatened, the more unwilling they were to submit. The surrounding crowd all held their breaths in concentration. If this deadlock continued, they didn't know how it would end. The crimes that the Department of Law had set were so serious, it was likely that all of these people would lose their lives here. Officer Luo, you have the highest military rank here. You should set an example for them. Leng Yuan suddenly said. He had never liked Li Qingshan. From the beginning until now, that man had a kind of unrestrained wildness about him. But he didn't come here today to kill people. Otherwise, any of his inner disciples would be able to kill all of these people. Senior brother Leng I. A long-faced man was startled, clearly unwilling. Junior brother Luo, how many of your comrades have sacrificed themselves on the battlefield of the demon territory? Countless. Officer Luo lowered his head. Could it be that you wish for your comrades to sacrifice their lives here in vain? I don't want to. When Li Qingshan betrayed the demon territory, he didn't care about you. This is the path he has chosen, so you must also choose your path. Leng Yuan changed his usual habit of being a man of few words and could almost be said to be patient and patient. Although the cultivation of these soldiers wasn't high, they were the backbone of the Xuanwu army. If these people died, the morale of the Xuanwu army would definitely be greatly affected. It might even be impossible to recover, which would be very disadvantageous to the sect. Officer Luo lowered his head and thought for a moment, then sighed. Thank you for your advice, senior brother. I understand. He turned around and walked towards the seaside. His right hand formed a knife and raised it high. He took a deep breath and swung it down heavily. A ray of light whistled through the air and slashed at the statue of Li Qingshan. With a rumble, the rubble scattered and sank into the sea with a pitter-patter. The surrounding crowd all let out cries of surprise. Looking at the back of Li Qingshan's statue, they saw that there was already a deep wound. Please remember this book's original domain name. Writing Pen Chinese Network Mobile Version Website. Chapter 1658. The curtain of night gradually fell. Darkness engulfed everything within thousands of miles, and not a single ray of light could be seen. The brightly lit Wanxiang city was like a lone boat in the boundless ocean. Dark clouds rolled in the night sky, and the night rain fell continuously. The majestic statue in the shallow sea had already turned completely black. Raindrops slid down Li Qingshan's thick eyebrows. His eyes were still staring into the darkness, and he didn't care about anything behind him. Lieutenant Luo blinked his eyes that were soaked by the cold rain and looked at the scar that he had left with his own hands in a daze. He suddenly felt extremely disappointed, as if he had lost something extremely important. The surrounding crowd felt like they were witnessing history. Just when everyone thought that Li Qingshan would start a long reign in the Wanxiang sect, it ended in an instant. Wang Juanxing, on the other hand, was extremely regretful. He couldn't do anything to Li Qingshan, so he could only vent his anger on Li Qingshan's lackeys, hoping that they would all die a horrible death. Humph, I thought you guys were tough, but it turns out you're just a bunch of cowards. Leng Yuan was still high up in the sky. Snowflakes danced around him, and a cold smile appeared on his cold face, like the water seeping out of a cracked lake. Who could go against the dignity of the law? Then, without needing him to say another word, the soldiers walked up one by one and left their own marks on the back of the black statue. The sword chi and blade chi were like bolts of lightning, instantly illuminating everyone's face before immediately sinking into darkness. Everything was carried out in silence, as if they were holding some kind of ceremony to draw a line with the past. Everyone was dazed and pale, without the confidence and high spirits they had when they first arrived. The hot blood that belonged to Azura gradually cooled down in their veins, and it was as cold as the rain, almost making them shiver. They didn't fight to the last moment on the battlefield, but instead succumbed to some kind of invisible pressure, the strict law made by those in power. Even a true Azura would lose their immortal body once they lost the battle intent in their heart, let alone them. The courage of a general as a soldier. That man was no longer here, and they were also separated from the army and separated into isolated individuals. Yet they had to face an invincible enemy once again. That kind of determination turned into helplessness of going with the flow, sacrificing the pride in their hearts like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. I suddenly understood that I wasn't a fierce warrior who dared to face the demon god directly. I was just a cultivator at the lowest level of the cultivation world, a small character such as an attendant or study partner, who could defy fate. In just a short while, Li Qingshan was covered in wounds as if he had been tortured by 1,000 cuts. He was on the verge of collapsing, unable to support his own weight. But coincidentally, no one was willing to strike that fatal blow and cause it to completely collapse. Continue, don't stop. Wang Juanxing ordered loudly, I've said it before, we must completely destroy it, not a single trace can be left. His eyes were like those of a hungry wolf, searching for the weakest sheep in the flock. Suddenly he locked onto one of them. Hey you! Don't think that I didn't see it. You're the only one who hasn't made a move yet. Everyone else has to make a move, or else we'll be the dogs of the demon domain. In the crowd, Tong Dagong's entire body trembled. First, many pairs of indifferent eyes looked at him, and then everyone's gazes gathered on him. Instantly he felt as heavy as a mountain. The comrades who were once close and familiar to him were now so distant, leaving him alone. General? He looked up at the black statue, the rain blurring his vision. As long as he walked up and waved his hand lightly, he would be able to free himself from this boundless pressure. But for some reason he thought of the black tortoise military god on the battlefield, who had condensed everyone's trust and hope. He was also a part of it. So not only could he not attack, but he inexplicably spat out a sentence. I'm willing to fight to the death with General. It sounded like a slogan, but also like a promise. Hearing this sentence, the indifferent gazes around him suddenly changed strangely. What did you say? Wang Juanxing didn't hear it clearly. Tong Dagong slowly turned his head, a burning conviction filled his heart, and his eyes faintly glowed red. He glared at Wang Juanxing angrily. Fuck you. Say it again, you're not willing to attack, are you also going to betray the sect? This question had once frightened all the true disciples, but Tong Dagong, the lowest level servant, spat fiercely. So what? Leng Yuan frowned. He had lost control of the situation slightly, so he immediately interrupted Wang Juanxing and tried to persuade him gently. Junior brother, Li Qingshan has already turned his back on you. Don't be so stubborn. As he spoke, his tone was full of warning. The giant beast under his feet seemed to have sensed its master's emotions and suddenly bared its scimitar-like fangs, fiercely staring at Tong Dagong. Tong Dagong's whole body was cold, his teeth chattering, and a strong sense of fear welled up in his heart. He almost bowed his head and admitted his mistake. But then he remembered the battle in Black Cloud City, the indomitable demon god incarnation that slaughtered these true disciples like dogs, many times more terrifying than Leng Yuan, but in the end didn't they also defeat it? His fear suddenly weakened, and the red light in his eyes intensified. Fuck you. If it weren't for Li Qingshan, you fucking true disciples would have already fled back to the Wanxiang sect. Li Qingshan may be a traitor of the Wanxiang sect, but he has never wronged me, Tong Dagong. Besides, if it weren't for Li Qingshan, I wouldn't even know where the gate of the Wanxiang sect is, and I would have already died in Black Cloud City. Tong Dagong scolded to his heart's content, his eyes red like fire, and there was no longer any fear in his heart. He had no loyalty to the Wanxiang sect, and ordinary soldiers like them were just peasant children recruited from all over the human world to guard the border. Although they had the opportunity to make contributions and enter the path of cultivation, in the bitter and cold frontier fortress without any cultivation resources, in the end, only 1 in 1,000 could become a disciple of the Wanxiang sect, and most of them became a pile of bones under Black Cloud City. Everyone was stunned. A mere Zhuji cultivator dared to speak to a young spirit cultivator like this. How dare you? Wang Juanxing shouted harshly, but he was a bit timid at heart. He vaguely saw the shadow of that man in Tong Dagong, which aroused deep fear in his heart. Only Leng Yuan remained calm and collected. The drizzling rain suddenly turned into flying snow that filled the sky. For a moment the sky was frozen and the earth was frozen. The giant beast under his feet let out a mournful roar that shook the heaven and earth. Tong Dagong, do you know what crime you've committed? Leng Yuan asked word by word. He also saw the shadow of that man in Tong Dagong, and a strong sense of disgust surged in his heart. Such a person must die. I know, isn't it just death? It's not like I haven't died before. Who are you trying to scare? With a clang, Tong Dagong drew his saber out of its sheath and placed it across his neck. My life was given by Li Qingshan, and today I will return it to him. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He clenched his teeth, clenched the hilt with both hands and gradually exerted force. The blade sank deep into his neck, and blood immediately gushed out, dyeing half of his body red. However, he did not relax at all. Inch by inch he cut open the flesh and blood and cut the neck bone along the bone. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the thick neck was cut open. When the neck was completely cut, he grabbed the bun on the top of his head with his right hand, lifted his head to show everyone, and suddenly fell on his back. Blood spread on the ground and the head rolled to one side. The red light in his eyes gradually dimmed. Although it was ferocious and terrifying, there was no fear. Please remember the original domain name of this book. Writing Pen Chinese mobile version website, M. Chapter 1659. When the Son of Heaven is angry, millions of corpses and blood flows for thousands of miles. Leng Yuan's power and status were not comparable to that of a king among mortals. Once he was angry, snow would fall for hundreds of miles and the sea would freeze. Not only did ordinary disciples keep quiet out of fear, but even other true disciples had to respect him. Because he was not only a yang spirit cultivator, but also represented the law and majesty of the Wanxiang sect. To be his enemy was to be the enemy of the entire Wanxiang sect. However, at this moment, blood as thick as fire slowly spread across the frost-covered ground, red and dazzling in the darkness. A hexagonal snowflake fell into it, immediately dyed red and then melted in the blood. When an ordinary man is angry, blood flows 5 steps. He could be destroyed, but he could not be defeated. Even if it was difficult to resist, he would never yield. When the rain condensed into snow, the water turned into ice and time seemed to freeze. Everyone was speechless. Whether it was the superior dean of the law department or the spectators watching from afar, they all fell into a deep silence. Only the sound of snowflakes falling could be heard, gradually covering the headless corpse. The blood was still warm. The soldiers formed a circle around the corpse, motionless like statues as if they were mourning or contemplating. Captain Luo gritted his teeth and stared at the blood with wide eyes. He and Tong Dagong did not belong to the same unit, and their ranks were also different, so they were not particularly familiar with each other. Except for meeting a few times when they received rewards, they were almost strangers. But that was the blood of his comrades. On the battlefield, the blood of comrades could only be paid with the blood of the enemy. How could there be no close? They shared the same hatred. But now, not only could he not take revenge, but he also had to bow his head to the person who forced Tong Dagong to his death. He could not help but feel a strong sense of shame. Yes, shame. Everything that happened today made him feel ashamed. It was a shame to be suspected by the sect that he had sworn to protect. It was a shame to be escorted here by the inspector. It was a shame to be accused by the law enforcement officer. It was a shame to be watched by everyone like a monkey show. However, the greatest humiliation did not come from the bystanders, but from himself. He actually gave in and brandished his saber, unlike Tong Dagong. Kacha. His teeth shattered and the pain was like a scorching fire. His mouth was filled with the taste of blood. However, he seemed to have woken up with a start and understood what he was doing. The feeling of humiliation became even more intense, and the pain was almost enough to drive him mad. 2 red lights lit up in the depths of his eyes, like 2 small sparks. Pairs of eyes lit up in the darkness. He was not the only one who felt this way. Leng Yuan was stunned as well. His killing intent had nowhere to be released, and it was as if he had punched empty air. He wanted to kill Tong Dagong because he wanted to punish him fairly and serve as a warning to others. Not only did he want Tong Dagong to regret his actions, but he also wanted all the bystanders to fear the strictness of the law and not dare to cross the line again. However, in the face of his determination to die, his majestic law seemed so powerless. The people were not afraid of death, so why should they be afraid of death? Leng Yuan took a deep look at the dilapidated statue and suddenly understood why he hated Li Qingshan so much. Whether it was when he entered the sect or after he became the eldest senior brother, or even when he was saved by him outside Black Cloud City, he could not have a good impression of him. Because no law could restrain that man. He was always trying to break free from all restraints and was never afraid of any punishment. At this time, he faintly felt that the atmosphere in the field was not right. These sergeants had drawn a line with Li Qingshan, and he could not force them anymore. It was time to end all this. Destroy it for me. Not a single trace can be left, or you will all end up like him. A roar suddenly came from under Leng Yuan's feet. Wang Juanxing looked at the scarlet and dazzling blood and suddenly felt a deep fear. He glanced at the towering statue and suddenly felt that it was looking at him. He took a step back as if he had been electrocuted. But then he remembered the days when he was like a stray dog and the humiliation of being bullied by Li Qingshan. Yes, Li Qingshan was no longer here and this was just a broken statue. Therefore, he sternly ordered the sergeants, his eyes bloodshot, and he seemed a little hysterical. Oh no! Leng Yuan's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to freeze Wang Juanxing to death. Shut up! Lieutenant Luo shouted angrily, his heart full of pain as if he had found a breakthrough. What did you say? You also want to die? Wang Juanxing shouted, not taking a golden core cultivator seriously at all. However, the next moment, all the sergeants turned their heads and looked at him, their eyes flashing red in the darkness. In an instant, the military spirit condensed, and the murderous spirit soared into the sky. This was not a group of low-level cultivators but a fierce beast. The pupils of the wolf-like beast under Leng Yuan's feet shrank, and the icicles on its body stood up as if it felt threatened. Wang Juanxing was only a nascent soul cultivator and had never been to Black Cloud City before, so he had never seen such a scene. He was so scared that his face turned pale and he kept retreating. He didn't notice that the water under his feet had frozen into ice, and he slipped and fell on his butt. The sergeants laughed loudly, their laughter full of contempt. They hated themselves for being ordered by such a despicable person just now. They talked and laughed as if they had found the pride in their hearts, no longer taking anyone seriously, whether it was Wang Juanxing, Leng Yuan, or the huge nature sect. De Gong is right. If it weren't for the general, we would all be dead, a sergeant said in a low voice. Even if we were alive, no one would take us seriously. I thought I was a big shot now, but in the end I was still ordered around like a dog. A sergeant sneered. Bah. Surnamed Wu, don't you know what kind of thing you are? Other than the general who would take you seriously. Yes, I was wrong. I dared to take myself seriously. I will definitely change from now on. But I think the general is also wrong. Don't stare at me. If the general treated us like dogs and let us die in Black Cloud City, we wouldn't have been bullied like this. Alas, we wouldn't have done such an ungrateful thing. Alas, who said it wasn't? If I gave a dog a bone, it would wag its tail at me and not bite me back. We really are worse than dogs. Forget it, I will apologize to the general. The sergeant surnamed Wu stepped out of the crowd and came to the statue of Li Qingshan. He knelt on one knee and gave a heavy military salute. Then he pulled out his saber and placed it across his neck. In an instant, a head rolled onto the frozen sea. A stream of hot blood rushed to the sky and sprinkled on the ice along with the flying snow. Old Wu, don't leave in a hurry. Wait for me. The sergeant who had spoken to him just now quickly stepped forward. He also knelt on one knee and gave a military salute. Then he impatiently cut off his head with his saber. The head fell to the ground. Hot blood spurted out and dyed the frozen sea red. The sergeants stepped forward one after another just like they had just now. But this time they didn't resist at all. Instead they seemed impatient. Before they knew it, a thin layer of white snow had accumulated on the ground. Blood flowed freely and invaded the snow-covered territory. It emitted hot air and melted every snowflake it came into contact with. Wang Juanxing felt the cold gaze from behind him. He hurriedly turned around and said, Senior Brother Leng, they've gone mad. They've all gone mad. Quickly kill them all and scatter their souls. Let them never reincarnate. Chapter 1660. As soon as Wang Juanxing said that, he immediately incurred the disgust of everyone present. Whether it was the cultivators from the other sects, his fellow disciples from the Myriad sect, or even his colleagues from the Law Division, they all frowned. They were all cultivators. Once their souls were dispersed, it meant they could no longer enter the cycle of rebirth. They would be completely obliterated. Their fates were even worse than mortals who died of old age or sickness. Even if it was a battle, if there wasn't a deep hatred between them, they wouldn't be so ruthless. These soldiers were not enemies. They were also disciples of the Myriad sect. They were Wang Juanxing's seniors and juniors. Not only had they never done anything to harm the sect, but they had also guarded the borders of Black Cloud City all year round, making great contributions to the sect. The core duties of the first senior brother of the Myriad sect were actually the same as theirs. The glory of soldiers was the unshakable moral foundation of the Myriad sect. And everyone present could not help but develop some respect for the soldiers' bravery and staunchness with which they were willing to die. As a result, even if they were reluctant to draw a clear line between themselves and Li Qingshan and were suspected of being involved with demon folk, killing was only a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Now they had all demonstrated their resolve with their deaths, completely eliminating the possibility of them betraying the sect. Yet Wang Juanxing actually wanted to disperse their souls. His words and actions were even more vicious than demon folk. Sensing everyone's enemies, Wang Juanxing immediately became exhausted. He was terrified, but he had no idea what he was afraid of. Leng Yuan's usually frigid heart boiled with fury. He hated that idiot Wang Juanxing to the core. He was basically attracting hatred for the Law Division. If it weren't for this idiot abusing his position to settle a personal grudge and provoke us recklessly, would this have happened? I shouldn't have accepted him into the Law Division in the first place. However, he never took these low-level soldiers seriously. Otherwise, why would he allow Wang Juanxing to act so arrogantly and domineeringly? Originally, he thought they were just a group of attendants and study companions at the lowest level. Even if they worked together, they would not be able to match a single hand of his. Moreover, without a first senior brother to stand up for them, how could they defy his will and the laws of the myriad sect? Giving them the opportunity to draw a clear line between themselves and the demon domain was already special treatment. However, now that the matter had developed to this point, he had already failed his duty as the head of the law division. This could not continue. Leng Yuan raised his hand, and his eyes shone with cold light. He condensed his powers, about to strike. Senior brother Leng, I'll call you senior brother for the last time. Lieutenant Luo said boldly, the general has saved our lives and we are comrades. We will never be able to draw a clear line between us. You have your laws and we have our choices. He was furious. We've spent our entire lives guarding the border city and fending off demon folk. We've never been disloyal to the sect. Even if Li Qingshan really does come charging over with demon folk in the future, I won't just remember his kindness and ignore the greater good. I will fight him to the death. I believe the general will not blame us. I won't regret dying in his hands. Although he didn't have much contact with Li Qingshan, there was an inexplicable sense of trust, as if they had known each other for many years. He could imagine such a scene. They would meet again on the battlefield, but they would fight against each other without any resentment until one of them fell. If they could perish together, that would be the best. Perhaps they could reunite in the Azura realm one day and break free from their identities as humans and demons. He would also be willing to continue following him into battle, respectfully referring to him as General. He would not swing his blade at his statue and berate him as a traitor, as if he had never received any kindness from him. However, all of this was still just the feelings of a warrior. It was neither acknowledged by Leng Yuan, nor was it understood by Dai Mingfan. He let out a long sigh. But since the sect doesn't believe us now and they even treat us like dogs, ordering us about and censuring us as they please, there's no point in humiliating us any further. If you want our souls to disperse, then do as you wish, but if you want us to continue serving the myriad phenomenon sect. He shook his head firmly. That's impossible. With that, he turned around and made his way over to the frozen sea. His comrades were waiting for him. What was there to fear even if their souls were dispersed? Leng Yuan had nothing to say. The cold light in his eyes receded, and his powers gradually dispersed. A sliver of confusion appeared in his eyes, and a crack appeared in his icy heart. Suddenly he began to doubt whether he had done something wrong. Should he not have summoned them from the army in the first place? Should he have respected their wishes more? However, he only acted according to the law and followed the wishes of eldest senior sister, Dai Mingfan, who made them draw a clear line between themselves and Li Qingshan. He wanted them to make a choice and they had already made their choice. At this time, even if they were all captured and detained, it would be meaningless. Captain Luo had clearly stated that he wanted to betray the sect, and according to the law, he would also be sentenced to death. Of course, his soul would not be dispersed. Generally speaking, the heaviest punishment for a sect disciple was to be sent into the cycle of reincarnation. This was not tolerance but the measure of the law. If the souls of fellow sect members were easily dispersed, what unity would the sect have to speak of? The demonic path sect might be so vicious, but it was still a small sect that could not be shown in public. Therefore, in terms of reason and law, he had no choice but to watch the soldiers' blood splatter on the frozen sea one by one. As a young spirit cultivator, he felt a deep sense of powerlessness. When the last head fell, the pier was littered with corpses, and the frozen sea was overflowing with blood. The scarred and tottering Li Qingshan was still standing on the frozen sea, looking into the depths of the sea. The hearts of all the onlookers were incomparably heavy. They had only wanted to watch a show, but who would have thought that the result would be so tragic? In the blink of an eye, hundreds of fellow disciples had fallen. How could they not feel sad for the loss of their own kind? As for those who had never seen Li Qingshan, they could not understand what kind of person Li Qingshan was. Why was he worthy of their loyalty? Leng Yuan looked up at the figure of Li Qingshan, and thought to himself, you could have united the sect and survived the great calamity together. Why did you fall into the devil's domain? At this time, blood crawled across the ice and flowed all the way to the feet of Li Qingshan. It seemed to have gained intelligence and consciousness, and there was a sound from its body. A crack ran through its neck, and with a loud crack, the huge head fell off and fell into the frozen sea with a boom. A huge wave soared hundreds of feet into the sky, mixed with the dancing ice and snow, pouncing in all directions. Rumble. A series of thunderous sounds rang out, and the frozen sea shattered. Cracks spread out like spider webs. The ice, which was as huge as a ship, rose and fell with the waves, making an ear-piercing sound of friction. Everyone could not help but cry out in alarm. Wang Juanxing suddenly saw the huge figure of Li Qingshan, pouncing towards him. He was almost paralyzed with fear and let out a scream. The statue has come to life. It turned out that Li Qingshan's ankle was broken, and it could no longer support its weight. Its headless body slowly fell backwards. With an earth-shattering sound, it smashed heavily into the frozen sea, stirring up a huge wave and completely shattering the surface of the sea. It was exactly the same way as the soldiers had died. Everyone was dumbfounded. The neck and ankle were the most vulnerable parts of a statue, but no one could believe that this was just a coincidence. Chapter 1661. The mysterious underworld cave Pai Yangqiu had already received the order and left Li Qingshan alone, lying on the surface of the water with his limbs spread out. From this angle, the mysterious underworld cave looked like a deep well. The mouth of the well was a round gray sky that hung high above the darkness and fell into his pitch-black eyes. The drizzle rippled around his ears and his thick black hair spread out and floated with the waves. He had already become a god, and all the god statues had his divinity residing in them. He had seen everything that happened outside Wanxiang City with his own eyes and could not calm down for a long time. He had never felt that he had done anyone any favors and had never expected such a return. Just as he had never expected such a statue to stand outside Wanxiang City. So if it was destroyed, then so be it. What did it matter? Even though his former comrades had drawn their blades against him, he did not feel surprised or angry. He just could not help but sigh a little. After all, it was the trend of the times, and the will of the heavens could not be disobeyed. To put it bluntly, he had never asked others to be like Li Qingshan. "You are too arrogant." He suddenly laughed. It was filled with self-mockery but also joy. Why can't others be like Li Qingshan? What's so great about Li Qingshan? A surge of hot blood surged in his chest like the surging magma under the ground. It was a heat that he had not felt for a long time. He seemed to have been floating on the black water for too long and had heard enough of the laments and pleas of the people of the demon territory. So he sat up and said softly, "Comrades, fight alongside me again." His voice came from his falling black hair and only echoed in the cave. However, the will of a god would definitely reach the Azura path and summon his soldiers again. How can it be said that I have no clothes? I share the same robe as my son. How can it be said that I have no clothes? I share the same hatred as my son. I will immediately avenge you. Li Qingshan's figure disappeared from the mysterious underworld cave. Those who exerted power and pressure on them would definitely feel an even greater power and pressure. That would be the fury of a god. The 100 Herb Garden. The sun rose and set. The date set by Dai Mengfan was approaching bit by bit. Wan Jianfeng, who was standing outside the garden, was ready to charge into the garden at any time to capture and kill Li Fengyuan or her. It was dusk, the sun had not set, and the crescent moon had just risen. The 100 Herb Garden fell into an unprecedented silence. The busy figures of the disciples were gone, leaving only a beautiful figure pacing back and forth in the garden. Only the plants were still thriving, ignorant of the joys and sorrows of the human world. Even though Ruan Yaozhu has already made up her mind, she can't help but feel her heartstrings tighten little by little, gradually feeling the chill of the evening wind. This would be her last time in the Herb Garden. She was not afraid of death like Dai Mengfan, but perhaps it was only at the moment of parting that she felt that time was short and that 1,000 years were fleeting. She simply let go of all distracting thoughts and focused on taking care of these plants. The 9-colored deer silently accompanied her, its gentle and moist eyes full of pity. This price was too heavy for her, and everything was for that man. The 9-colored deer raised its head and looked at the hill in the distance. Li Fengyuan was sitting cross-legged under the Bodhi tree with a resolute expression, as if he was an eminent monk who was ready to sacrifice himself for his cause and had completely disregarded life and death. "Sai, you sure can let it go." The 9-colored deer no longer blamed that man, but it couldn't help but think back to that autumn night many years ago when it met that man by chance. It felt that every drink and every peck was predestined. In Whitestag, he casually brought a group of beggars to drink with flowers and exchanged a peach tree for a full meal for the beggars. But in the dead of night, he lamented the death of the peach tree. Perhaps it was at that moment that he touched Ruan Yaoju's heartstrings. That was why she made an exception during the entrance examination and gambled on whether he was good or evil. That time she won the bet and even made a small profit. But this time the bet was on herself, and whether she won or lost, it was meaningless to her. The crime of betraying the sect meant certain death. Even a gambler like Lu Tian would never take part in a gamble that was guaranteed to lose, so she could not be regarded as a true gambler at the end of the day. She was just like many years ago, stubbornly believing in that man. She believed that that man would always be benevolent despite being violent and resolute. He would never associate himself with demon folk. Suddenly, Li Fengyuan opened his eyes under the Bodhi tree and waved his hand into the distance. The nine-colored deer gazed in that direction and could not help but widen its eyes. It rubbed its horn against Ruan Yaoju in a hurry and called out, "Blockhead, blockhead." "What's wrong?" Ruan Yaoju was currently buried in the flowers and trees. She could not help but raise her head and become stunned too. Under the bright red light of the setting sun, a tall, large figure strode over. He arrived before her in just a few steps. With a familiar smile on his face, he called out Yaoju before spreading his arms and embracing her firmly. Everything had happened too suddenly. She was unable to respond at all, but she felt her heartstrings ease up as if a tremendous burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She no longer had the slightest bit of strength left in her body, but her eyes reddened. The nine-colored deer could no longer care about separating them. It only felt like they had been rescued from the jaws of death. They all believed without reason that as long as this man appeared, all of their problems would be resolved. The nine-colored deer called out, "Li Qingshan, you've finally returned. Did you know that the spirit sovereign of Sea has already announced that you've betrayed the demon domain? In order to protect your unlucky son, Yaoju sealed off the entire 100-herb garden. We almost died because of you." Li Qingshan smiled without saying anything, but his expression was the same as usual. His bearing was peaceful, without the slightest hint of demon qi on him. Even the benevolent Qilin was nothing more than this. When he looked at Ruan Yaoju, his gaze was filled with tenderness. "I knew you wouldn't," Ruan Yaoju murmured, but her face reddened again. She gently tried to break free from Li Qingshan's embrace. But Li Qingshan hugged her even tighter. A trace of regret flashed in his eyes. He shouldn't have let her suffer any more grievances. Li Fengyuan sighed in his heart. He stood up and carefully examined Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan seemed to sense something. He also turned his head and looked at Li Fengyuan up and down. The father and son seemed like they didn't know each other at this moment, but it also seemed like they were confirming something. In the time since they separated, they had undergone earth-shattering changes. The nine-colored deer said, "Can you two stop looking at each other? Wan Jianfeng is about to kill his way in. Junior Marshal Brother Wan. He's quite gutsy. He dares to bully our Yaoju. Senior Marshal Brother Wan is just following orders. Don't blame him," Ruan Yaoju said softly. She knew that Li Qingshan's murderous nature was extremely heavy. She was afraid that he would hurt Wan Jianfeng and ruin their relationship. Following Dai Mingfan's orders? Senior Marshal Sister Dai had no choice. The spirit sovereign insisted that she be the eldest senior marshal sister. In that case, it's all that old tortoise's fault. The spirit sovereign is only following the sect's laws. He must have gone senile. That's why he made the wrong divination, thinking that you've fallen into the demon domain. He just needs to resolve the misunderstanding. Well, you? Still the same. Li Qingshan couldn't help but shake his head. He looked in the direction of the myriad phenomenon sect. "I'll go find Spirit Sovereign of Sea and explain it clearly." Chapter 1662. Nine-colored deer frowned slightly, vaguely sensing that something was amiss with Li Qingshan's tone. But on second thought, this kid had always had a bad temper. Now that he had been wronged by Spirit Sovereign Guihai, he must be infuriated. He would definitely demand justice from that old turtle. With his current cultivation, he's not much weaker than that old turtle. That old turtle is probably in deep trouble this time. However, she had a sliver of doubt in her heart. She and Spirit Sovereign Guihai were both Khanate gods, so she understood the extraordinariness of the spirit turtle race better than humans. Human cultivators had to study arduously for many years to comprehend the Tao of divination, but it was an innate ability for spirit turtles. It was as natural as swimming. Furthermore, Spirit Sovereign Guihai has always been cautious. If he wasn't completely confident in such a major matter, there's no way he would announce it to the public like this, damaging the reputation of the myriad phenomenon sect for nothing. Why would he make such a mistake? But when she looked at Ruan Yaozhu, who was nestled in Li Qingshan's arms, she did not look like the 100 Herb Gardens lord at all. She was clearly a little woman who had found someone to rely on. She heaved a sigh of relief when she heard that. Her slightly blushed face beamed and she was completely at ease. She believed that Li Qingshan would explain everything to Spirit Sovereign Guihai and resolve this huge misunderstanding. She even felt a little smug. Sigh, this silly blockhead. It's truly a love calamity. In this situation, Nine-Colored Deer obviously could not voice out her doubts. She could only hope that the greatest and deepest worry in her heart would not come true. Li Qingshan suddenly changed the topic. But before that, do you want to hear my story, Yaozhu? Yes. Ruan Yaozhu nodded and suddenly exclaimed. It turned out that Li Qingshan had carried her and brought her to a patch of flowers to sit on the ground. Ruan Yaozhu was so embarrassed that she could not help but struggle. She said coquettishly, "Senior brother, let go of me." Nine-Colored Deer stomped her front paws in indignation, thinking, which man would let go of you when you look like this? Li Qingshan whispered into Ruan Yaozhu's ear. Don't move. Let me finish. His deep voice seemed to have a kind of magic or a kind of majesty. Ruan Yaozhu stopped struggling and blinked her eyes as she looked up at him. This was the perfect fusion of the path of the heavenly devil and the might of a god. His words carried the will of heaven, and every single move he made emitted boundless charm. Every single word he said was like an order that was difficult to resist, and it was sufficient to affect the mind of a young spirit cultivator. Of course, at this moment Ruan Yaozhu didn't have any intention of resisting him at all. She believed in Li Qingshan unreservedly, and was also in the midst of great sorrow and great joy of reuniting after a long time. It could be said that she was at a loss. At first, I didn't go to the infernal domain. Instead, I was guided to the Elysium and was given the title of Divine General Garan. When Li Qingshan began to talk about his experiences, Ruan Yaozhu gradually forgot her shyness and immersed herself in his story. Li Fengyuan and the Nine-Colored Deer also pricked up their ears and listened carefully. The Elysium was a magical world, and everything that Li Qingshan experienced in the Elysium was even more bizarre and incredible. Everyone present felt that in Li Qingshan's calm voice, there were emotions that could not be described in words. Sometimes, he was like an old man who was talking about the past many years ago. Sometimes he was as naive as a child who didn't know the right and wrong, good and evil of the world. When they heard that he had gone as far as to undergo nerva rebirth in order to resist the influence of the Elysium and lose all of his memories, everyone worried for him. However, they also felt like this was something Li Qingshan would do. When they heard that he had been adopted by an old couple and was named Egg, everyone smiled. They felt like the name suited him very well for some reason. Unknowingly, the last ray of afterglow faded from the horizon and night fell. As the story progressed, Eggshing finally embarked on a journey to the Big Layin Temple. Everything was like fate. The audience became more and more immersed in the story, and the surrounding flowers and trees also seemed to be listening attentively. Li Qingshan was once a disciple, but he had to admit that he was not very successful in this line of work. He could only copy the works of his previous life and still needed little Anne's help to edit and polish them. To put it bluntly, those stories did not belong to him at all. And now, this was the most wonderful story he had ever told, a story that completely belonged to him. The moon was in the middle of the sky, and silver light shone everywhere. Li Qingshan, what are you doing? Suddenly there was a shout. The Nine-Colored Deer's eyes were filled with anger as it stared at Li Qingshan. To be more precise, it was staring at Li Qingshan's left hand, which was hiding beside Ruan Yaozhu. Ruan Yaozhu was at a loss, as if she had just woken up from a dream. Her mind was still immersed in the story. Everything that Li Qingshan experienced in the demon domain was far more bizarre and thrilling than the Elysium. She also wanted to know if Li Qingshan could escape from the evil god Jiuying's labyrinth, and how he defeated demon god Qiongqi. As expected of a natural god, I haven't finished my story yet. Li Qingshan shook his head with some regret. But it's getting late, let's stop here for today. Jiu. Ruan Yaozhu blinked her eyes, looked at the Nine-Colored Deer, and then looked at Li Qingshan, not knowing what had happened. And at some point, Li Fengyuan had closed his eyes again, unable to bear to see what would happen next. Li Qingshan slowly raised his left hand, and in his palm was a blooming cereus. The white and slender petals slowly bloomed in his hand, as if he had casually plucked them. But there was not a single blooming cereus in the surrounding flowers. That blooming cereus did not look like an ordinary spiritual herb. Its petals were all the same size, and the distance between the petals was exactly the same. There were 3 layers, and each layer had 24 petals for a total of 72 petals. The great array of the 100-herb garden was called the 72 Marquises array. The almanac said, 5 days are the marquises, 3 marquises are the qi, 6 qi are the time, and 4 seasons are the years. There were 24 solar terms in a year, which were further divided into 72 marquises. The purpose of the 72 marquises array was to subtly adjust the climate of the 100-herb garden, allowing all kinds of strange flowers and plants with different habits to flourish. That was how it got its name. The 100-herb garden was the foundation of the myriad appearance sect. The power of this 72 marquises formation was far above the great mysterious nether formation of the mysterious nether cave mansion. This 72-petaled epiphyllum was the core formation disk of this formation. It was also the symbol of the master of the 100-herb garden. Ruan Yaozhu touched the Sumeru ring on her finger, and the blooming cereus was indeed not there. She panicked as if she had stepped on air, and there was a bottomless abyss below her. She struggled out of his embrace and forced a smile. Qingshan, stop messing around. I can't give this to you even if you are the eldest Xixiang. Her tone was almost pleading. The 9-colored deer's heart was about to break when he heard this, and he stared at Li Qingshan. However, Li Qingshan was unfazed. He stared at the blooming cereus in his hand. A strand of darkness was released from the stamen, dyeing the pure white petals black from the inside out. The formation of the 72 marquises was profound and complicated. Even though he had already become a god, he was only here as a clone after all. He would struggle to refine it in a short amount of time. However, apart from the master of the 100-herb garden and the spirit sovereign of Guihai, there was another person who knew the formation of the 72 marquises like the back of their hand, and that was the caretaker of the abundance department, Pai Yangqiu. The 9-colored deer said furiously, "Blockhead, don't be stupid. He wants to take your 100-herb garden. He's already become a demon." Li Qingshan seemed to be completely focused on refining the blooming cereus. He no longer tried to hide anything radiating with heavy demon qi. It was a darkness even deeper than the night, completely obscuring the bright moonlight. His figure was swallowed in the darkness as well, and his eyes shone with scarlet light. In the depths of the darkness were the painful and resentful murmurs of a billion demon folk. He no longer seemed to be among the flowers, but sitting high above a sea of blood. "No, you won't." Ruan Yaozhu shook her head slowly as tears fell like rain. Li Qingshan raised his head and glanced at her. He let out a sigh as if he was saying, "Yaozhu, this is the ending of the story." The blooming cereus in his hand was completely dyed black. Chapter 1663. Li Qingshan, you are not human. The 9-colored deer was furious. It stomped on the ground with its hind legs and leaped into the air. 9-colored light flowed around its agile body and its coral-like antlers emitted a dazzling 9-colored light. It was like a rainbow piercing through the sun, dispersing the dark demonic aura that shrouded Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan lost all his vision the moment he saw the light. All he could see was the dazzling light. He knew that she had activated her innate ability. The antlers touched his chest fiercely. His incarnation here was only at the 3rd level of the Heaven's Tribulation, so it was impossible for him to withstand the full blow of a demon sovereign. Li Qingshan closed his eyes. He held the flower in his left hand and formed a seal with his right hand. The flower flowed and his fingers changed. He reached out and touched the tip of the antlers as if they were connected. He chanted, "On the day of the summer solstice, antlers disintegrate." Among the 72 petals of the flower, one of them flashed. Then, countless mysterious runes could be seen flowing on the petal. It was really one flower, one world. It was not an ordinary flower. The 9-colored deer trembled and froze in midair. The light on its antlers peeled off layer by layer. Even the 9-colored light on its body dimmed quickly. It staggered and knelt on the ground. It was still waving its antlers and casting its innate ability to fight to the death with Li Qingshan. She said angrily, "I should have killed you the first time I saw you." Li Qingshan closed his eyes and sighed, "Perhaps." Another petal of the flower in his left hand flashed. On the day of the beginning of winter, the water begins to freeze. The 9-colored deer's all-out attack was blocked. Its struggle was just an arrow at the end of its flight. He pressed down and grabbed the antlers. Frost quickly spread from his palm and covered the entire antlers. In the blink of an eye, her beautiful white fur was covered with a layer of light blue frost. She could no longer move. At this moment, the power of this 72 Marquis formation was revealed. It was not just used to take care of flowers and trees. It was ever-changing in accordance with the solar terms, the 4 seasons, and the way of nature. It contained the power of heaven and earth. As an innate deity, the 9-colored deer's strength was far stronger than ordinary monster emperors, but it was still easily suppressed. Even if a human immortal or evil god were to barge into the array, there was a risk of dying. If Ruan Yaozhu was on full alert, even if Li Qingshan used his most powerful incarnation, it would not be easy for him to take down this 100-herb garden. As long as he was delayed for a short while, he would be surrounded by the selfless heavenly palace, wasting his strength for nothing. Although the 9-colored deer had been suppressed, it still glared at Li Qingshan firmly as it panted heavily from its nostrils. She had never hated a person so much before, not even when she had been betrayed by hunters and taken into the imperial palace to starve and wait for death. Li Qingshan, how has Yaozhu ever wronged you? She doesn't blame you for destroying the white deer country. She was the one who stood up for you when you were framed. No one believed you. She was the only one who believed you. She didn't hesitate to break off relations with the sect. Why did you treat her like this? What? At this point she couldn't help but tear up. Ugh, Yaozhu is too pitiful. Li Qingshan sighed in his heart. The 9-colored deer's words were even more destructive than her innate magical power. He couldn't resist or escape. Ruan Yaozhu lowered her head and stood still. She didn't attack together with the 9-colored deer. As the owner of the 100-herb garden, she knew the power of this 72 Marquis's array better than anyone else. She also knew what Li Qingshan was capable of. Now that the night flower was gone, any struggle would be futile. She couldn't help but mutter to herself, so I really only cared about love and didn't care about the righteousness of the sect. Li Qingshan's expression was solemn. He said calmly, Yaozhu, what you practice is the nature tomes, right? The tears on Ruan Yaozhu's face hadn't dried yet. She looked over indifferently, but when she saw Li Qingshan's face, she couldn't hide her sorrow. A feeling of pity welled up in Li Qingshan's heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He continued, you are talented and blessed. The path you walk is not as prejudiced as Chao Tianjiao and Li Liehua. You have a paradise like the 100-herb garden. You should have gone through 6 heavenly tribulations long ago and become a human immortal. Unfortunately, you still haven't understood the way of nature, or rather, you only understood half of it. Ruan Yaozhu turned her head away. She didn't want to talk to Li Qingshan, nor did she want to see him again. It's true that the heavens have the virtue of cherishing life. But it's also the law of nature. Wolves chase sheep, eagles chase rabbits. Even these senseless flowers and trees have to fight for sunlight and rain. They grow thorns to resist harm. This is the evil in the hearts of all living beings. Is this the reason why you became a demon? Ruan Yaozhu couldn't help but interrupt him. If you have evil in your heart, you must do evil? If others do evil, you can do evil? He was extremely disappointed. The way of nature has nothing to do with good or evil. The kindness in your heart is your gift, but it's also your obstacle. Li Qingshan shook his head. What I want to say is, where there is life there must be death. Right now, I will demonstrate the other half of the way of nature to you. Speaking to this point, Li Qingshan suddenly let out a long breath, as if he wanted to exhale all the depressed air in his chest. The surrounding plants rustled. Ruan Yaozhu widened her eyes in shock. She saw that the 10,000-year-old nether radiant orchid next to Li Qingshan had suddenly bloomed completely, giving off a faint blue light. She would have needed to take care of it for several years. All the plants around Li Qingshan, these strange flowers and plants that would normally take thousands of years to grow a foot and an inch, all grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. Their branches stretched out towards the sky, spitting out flower buds. In an instant, millions of flowers bloomed to their heart's content, competing with each other in beauty under the moonlight. As for the flowers that were already blooming, they bloomed to an unimaginable degree, as if they wanted to display all of their beauty without holding anything back. Li Qingshan was completely submerged by the flourishing plants, but Ruan Yaozhu could clearly hear his breathing suddenly stop. Her heart also stopped. She had never been greedy for life or afraid of death, but at this moment she felt that a disaster was imminent. She cried out in shock, "Don't!" Her voice was like a cuckoo crying blood, full of pleading. Who knew how much effort she had poured into the 100-herb garden? These plants were far more important than her life. At this moment, the scene of her first meeting with Li Qingshan suddenly appeared in her mind. That autumn night, that peach blossom tree. Her heart was filled with grief, but strangely she also calmly realized that this man would not stop for her. Just like how he would lament the death of the peach blossom tree, but still choose to let the peach blossoms bloom. Li Qingshan's exhalation turned into an inhale. This breath was slow and long, as if he wanted to suck in all the air in the 100-herb garden. In a split second, the plants withered and thousands of flowers withered. It was as if they had entered the late autumn season. The plants within a radius of 30 meters all withered and turned yellow, turning into mud. Those flourishing plants seemed to have exhausted all of their vitality, but they also spat out all of their spiritual qi, which surged into Li Qingshan's body. The incarnation's cultivation base immediately skyrocketed, rushing to the cultivation base of the fourth heaven's tribulation. Even its body became much taller. These exotic plants had different attributes. If one wanted to use them to refine pills, they would have to harmonize the yin and yang and the 5 elements. It would also require a lot of time for the water and fire to complement each other, forming the 9 transformations of the pill. After the pill was formed, one also had to pay attention to whether it was hot or cold when consuming it. The medicinal properties must not clash. However, Li Qingshan omitted all of these processes. He made these plants go from life to death, spitting out the most primitive and purest vitality, transforming it into the incarnation's cultivation base. This kind of method was the divine power of Qilin transformation. He had already obtained the core laws of the pure land of ultimate bliss and the evil land of the infernal region. When the two were combined, it would be the paradise Qilin transformed from the primordial Qilin. His Qilin transformation had long achieved great success. At this moment he was the incarnation of the original Qilin. The heaven and earth were heartless and the cycle of life and death. This was the Tao of nature that Ruan Yaozhu had yet to comprehend. Chapter 1664. Qilin had compassion for the common people. Li Qingshan didn't understand the Qilin's way of extreme benevolence, but now he understood it completely. To be born without having, to not rely on, to not be exploited, is the virtue. Nature gave birth to all living creatures, but it didn't take any of them as its own. It didn't demand any living creature to be loyal and filial. Its benevolence was everywhere, but it was so mysterious that no one could feel it. It seemed that everything was natural, so it was called nature. Of course, the real Qilin wouldn't turn the vitality of plants into its own power like Li Qingshan did. Li Qingshan didn't follow the way of Qilin after all. He just used the power and changes of Qilin. However, even the original Qilin couldn't completely follow its own path. It went against its inborn nature and followed Emperor Hua to participate in the battle of patching up the sky. It died under the thunder of Emperor Shi. After all, the original Qilin was just one of the living creatures, not the Great Way Law. However, when it looked at the figure that patched up the sky with its own body, it probably didn't regret its choice. If the sky had feelings, it would also grow old. In a breath, the cycle of life and death changed. From the blooming of flowers to the withering of grass, from the flourishing scene to the desolation. Even mortals would have some inspiration when they saw this scene, not to mention the few cultivators here were all talented and intelligent. Under the golden leaf Bodhi tree, Li Fengyuan stretched out his hand, and a dead leaf fell on his palm. He looked up and saw the leaves rustling in the wind, scattering all over the ground, leaving only dry branches that pierced the night sky. He couldn't help but touch the rough trunk, and he understood the sadness in it. Although the 9-colored deer was suppressed by Li Qingshan, it still couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity. Qilin was the leader of the walking beasts, and the 9-colored deer was especially close to the Qilin. Now that he was watching the primordial Qilin's incarnation, Li Qingshan, unfold the natural way of life and death, he immediately felt like he had attained enlightenment. He had almost forgotten to oppose Li Qingshan. Only Ruan Yaozhu could only watch helplessly as the 100-herb garden that she had poured her life's blood, sweat, and tears into was destroyed. She couldn't help but kneel on the ground and press her hand on her chest. She only felt pain in her heart. If it weren't for the natural tome, she would have gone mad and lost control of her mana. She wouldn't have cared about the Tao of nature. Li Qingshan sighed in his heart, but he still focused on absorbing the spiritual energy. With him as the center, a withered yellow color quickly spread out. Wherever it went, the plants withered and died. The surging spiritual energy was so dense that it was almost liquid. It flowed with dazzling spiritual light and converged toward him with the momentum of 100 rivers returning to the sea. His body grew taller, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. In an instant he was taller than all the trees around him. The cultivation of the incarnation continued to soar, and in the blink of an eye, it had reached the fifth heavenly tribulation, the realm of the young spirit cultivator. It still showed no signs of slowing down. Until this moment, Li Qingshan had only absorbed the spiritual energy of the plants within a radius of 1,000 feet. There were countless strange flowers and plants, and any one of them could cause many cultivators to fight for it outside. But compared to the entire 100-herb garden, it was just a drop in the bucket. The terrain of the 100-herb garden was extremely open. In order to adapt to the growth of different plants, there were mountains, valleys, plains, deserts, lakes, and rivers. Although Li Qingshan was the master of the devil's domain and sat on the boundless devil's domain, he couldn't help but sigh at the depth of the plenitude sect's foundation. So what if a few true disciples died? As long as the 100-herb garden existed, there would be an endless stream of new true disciples. And for the current Li Qingshan, it was equivalent to an endless stream of enemies. Therefore, the 100-herb garden had to be uprooted, and it could also be used as food for the enemy to strengthen his strength. There was a saying in the art of war, eating an enemy's bell is equivalent to eating 20 of mine. If you are afraid of one stone, you are equivalent to eating 20 stones. And the most important thing was that this power didn't come from the devil's domain, so it wouldn't be easily detected by the guy in the sky. Only then would he have a chance to swallow the plenitude sect while the enemy was unprepared. Of course, the 100-herb garden wasn't that important, and the plenitude sect wasn't that important either. There were at least hundreds of sects in the mortal realm. One more or one less wouldn't necessarily affect the overall situation. Who didn't have a place similar to the 100-herb garden? If he had a choice, Li Qingshan didn't want to hurt Ruan Yaozhu. But in the plenitude sect, there was something he had to obtain. This thing would affect the fate of all living beings in the devil's domain, and even the direction of the future war. Very quickly, this incarnation's cultivation reached the peak. 6 tribulations, worldly immortal. His body was as tall as a mountain. Every time one's cultivation increased by a large realm, the amount of spiritual energy needed would increase by thousands of times. But in this 100-herb garden, it wasn't a problem at all. In fact, most of the garden was still lush and green. Li Qingshan didn't stop absorbing spiritual energy. Instead, he lowered his head and looked at Ruan Yaozhu. Yaozhu. He didn't open his mouth, but his voice sounded in Ruan Yaozhu's heart. It was like the howling of the wind or the shaking of the earth, but it didn't sound like a human's voice. Ruan Yaozhu's heart felt like it was dying. Hearing the voice, she couldn't help but look up. She met a pair of green eyes which also didn't belong to a human. At this time, Li Qingshan's face was no longer human. Instead, it was between a lion and a human. A pair of green antlers grew out of his thick black hair, standing tall on top of his head. But this appearance wasn't as terrifying as it was just now. Instead, it emitted some kind of mysterious divinity. It was like an ancient statue of a god that had been forgotten by people, sitting peacefully on the ground. In a split second, Ruan Yaozhu seemed to have forgotten the pain in her heart. She was immersed in that pair of green eyes. As the cultivation of the incarnation reached its peak, Li Qingshan's god's might and the way of the heavenly demon had also reached its peak. Not to mention that Ruan Yaozhu's mind was in a mess. She probably wouldn't be able to resist him even under normal circumstances. When their eyes met, Li Qingshan imparted to her the Qilin strategy of immortality from the 9 transformations of the demons and gods, as well as his various understandings of the way of nature after combining the core principles of the pure land of ultimate bliss and the evil earth of the devil realm to her. She was enlightened. Ruan Yaozhu groaned and frowned slightly. Qingshan, stop. Don't worry. I won't directly distort your mind. I'll just show you the true path. You'll still need to slowly understand it in the future. Li Qingshan only pushed her from behind, forcing her to see the true way of nature. Moreover, she had already accumulated enough experience. With this help, she could cross the boundary between immortal and mortal and reach the human immortal realm. When Ruan Yaozhu's expression calmed down a little, Li Qingshan stretched out his finger and gently touched her forehead, injecting surging spiritual power into her body. Ruan Yaozhu desperately shook her head and struggled. She was absolutely unwilling to accept this power. Using the plants in the 100-herb garden as her cultivation resources was simply stealing what she was guarding. However, Li Qingshan's god's might was like a mountain. How could she resist? She could only shed more tears of grievance. The 9-colored deer exclaimed, "Wait! You'll kill her." However, Li Qingshan ignored it. Instead, he continued to absorb spiritual power and imbued even more spiritual power into Huan Yaozhu. Although a lot of spiritual power was needed to refine the Yang spirit into the primordial spirit, it was nothing compared to the 100 Herb Garden. In an instant, the sky was filled with tribulation clouds and thunder rumbled. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.